What if the oldest Bible on earth holds stories the world chose to forget? The night lies heavy and serene over the Ethiopian highlands. Above the stars shimmer like embers scattered across the sky. Quiet, ancient, eternal. The wind moves slowly through the tall grass, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and myrrh, as though time itself has slowed to listen. There is something sacred in this stillness, something that feels older than memory. Beneath these ancient stars, the mountains of Ethiopia glow faintly, touched by the silver light of the moon, the same moon that has watched prophets walk these lands, that has seen kingdoms rise, crumble, and rise again. Imagine sitting at the edge of one of those mountains tonight, a soft blanket of mist curling around you, a faint hum of distant life whispering through the valley. In the distance, a bell from a monastery tolls once, twice, then fades. The world is asleep, but the story you are about to hear is awake, a story older than any kingdom, older than the languages we speak, older than the ink that shaped the world's scriptures. For thousands of years, Ethiopia has been called the land of beginnings, a land where history and legend walk side by side. It is said that when humanity was still learning to speak, these mountains were already whispering to heaven. It is a place where the sacred never died, where ancient books survived when empires did not, and where the rhythm of prayer has never been broken. Somewhere deep within a monastery carved into stone, hidden from the noise of the modern world, rests a book unlike any other. Its pages are darkened by time, its edges kissed by centuries of devotion. This is the Ethiopian Bible, one of the oldest and most complete collections of sacred writings ever known. Within its leather-bound covers live not just the stories we know of prophets, kings, and divine encounters, but also the ones the world forgot to remember, the ones lost in translation, buried in time, or deliberately silenced. The monks who guard it do not speak much. Their eyes seem to hold something, an understanding of the weight of these pages, of what it means to carry memory itself. They chant in Ge'ez, an ancient tongue that once sang across Africa and the Near East. The same language once spoken by angels in prayers older than parchment. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it, that low, rhythmic murmur that rises like incense into the night. Each sound carries centuries. Each breath carries faith, and as you breathe in, you might begin to feel it too, that subtle ache for something deeper, older, and more complete than what the modern world offers. We scroll endlessly, searching for connection. We chase knowledge, but often miss wisdom. We build towers, but forget the foundation. Somewhere inside us, a quiet voice still longs for what was lost, for the truths hidden in old mountains and forgotten scriptures. The Ethiopian Bible speaks to that longing. It carries within it entire books that never made it into the Western canon, stories of prophets who saw beyond time, angels who walked among men, and kings whose reigns touched eternity. It tells of Enoch, who was taken by God before death could touch him, of the forgotten prophets who wrote of heavenly mysteries, of wisdom literature that reads like whispers from the stars themselves. Tonight, under the slow dance of starlight, let your mind rest here among the peaks and monasteries where torches still flicker beside stone altars. The monks move quietly, their robes brushing against the floor like waves against the shore. Somewhere, a candle sputters out, and another is lit, the symbol of a truth that never truly dies, only passes from one hand to another, from one century to the next. The camera of your imagination drifts over the highlands, over rivers that gleam like ribbons of glass. over ruins that breathe history into the earth, over the city of Axum, where legends say the Ark of the Covenant still rests. You begin to feel the pulse of this land, steady, ancient, unhurried. And as the wind brushes your face, you realize that Ethiopia is not just a place, it is a heartbeat that has never stopped. It carries within it the rhythm of divine memory, the echo of words once spoken by prophets who saw the unseen. It is the keeper of a story the world almost forgot, a story you are about to hear. So take a slow breath. Feel the calm of this night settle into you. Let your thoughts drift between earth and heaven, between what is known and what still waits to be discovered. The story that follows is not just history, it is the voice of time itself, calling across the ages. If you can feel the peace of this moment, if the stars above you seem a little closer now, I want you to do something simple before we journey deeper into this story. Subscribe, so you can stay close to these ancient tales, and tell me, in the comments below, what is your name, which city are you watching from, and what time of night have you found this calm? Because tonight, the mountains remember, and they are ready to speak. There is a faint smell of parchment and oil lamps in the air. A group of scribes is sitting cross-legged in a small, stone-walled room deep inside a monastery. Their eyes are close to the dim light of flickering candles. Each man moves with great care, and the quill glides over the rough parchment like a whisper in the dark. Their robes are plain, and their hands are rough from years of copying words they think are not their own, but are divine. The world sleeps outside. The night hums softly through the cracks in the stone walls. But here, time is frozen. Each stroke of ink carries the weight of heaven and earth, of creation and covenant, and of the fragile link between the mortal and the eternal. The only sound is the faint crackle of the fire and the steady rhythm of ink meeting parchment. This is a heartbeat of devotion that has echoed for centuries. They write down what prophets and kings said, what exiles cried about, and what people who said they saw God's face in fire saw. Some of these words will go a long way, being translated and told again and again, changing the course of history. Some people will never leave this room. Empires will hide them, protect them, and forget about them. But those who guard them in silence will remember them, in the flicker of lamplight. The birth of Scripture begins not with grand speeches or royal decrees, but with tired hands and quiet faith. The scribes know that their work could last for thousands of years. They are not writing to become famous. They are writing to keep a voice alive that should never die. But not everyone should hear every voice. Some scrolls are kept safe behind stone walls or buried under altars. Some are erased by rulers who were afraid of what they said, and others are burned by councils that decided which words were holy and which were not. There are many sacred texts that the world has forgotten about, but Ethiopia, that land of mountains and mystery, did not forget. Ethiopia kept its scriptures whole, while other countries changed their faith to fit kings and councils. The monks of Lalibela, Oxum, and Debre Damo kept copying the words that the rest of the world chose to erase. Even though the Western world bound its canon and said it was complete, they didn't protect these scrolls as relics. They protected them as living things. Think about those early centuries when caravans traveled through the deserts and merchants carried spices, gold, and scrolls wrapped in cloth. Some of those scrolls had writings on them that are now lost to the rest of the world, like the books Enoch, Jubilees, and the Shepherd of Hermas. They rode on camels, hidden under baskets, and were carried across hot sands to the cool mountains of Ethiopia. where they would be safe from the storms of time. The monks read them out loud in Ge'ez, the holy language of their ancestors, inside the monasteries. The language sounds like soft thunder rolled, deep and musical. Their chants rise and fall like waves, as if the scrolls are coming back to life after being silent for hundreds of years. Every word has echoes of truths that have been lost, the tales of angels and watchers, the secrets of how the world was made, and the prayers of prophets who never made it into the Western Bible. But what does it mean for truth to be quiet? Maybe truth, like the stars, doesn't go away when it's hidden. It will only be seen again on the right night. The forgotten scrolls have been waiting in the dark, as if they knew that one day the world would want their light again. That is very human. We forget what was most important to us, but somewhere, something remembers for us. The mountains of Ethiopia have done what memory often can't. They have kept the voice of the holy alive, untouched by time or war. While empires rose and fell, armies marched, and religions split, the scrolls slept peacefully under stone and candlelight, watched over by men who only wanted to be able to remember. You would feel it if you could walk through one of those monasteries. Today, the weight of centuries pressing softly against your soul. The air would smell like old paper and wax. There would be old crosses and faded paintings of saints whose names you might not know carved into the walls. A monk might still be bent over a wooden table in a side room, copying a passage that was first written before your ancestors had names. He might move his lips as he writes, saying the words in a prayer. He isn't in a hurry. He never does. You can't rush the divine. Every stroke is a promise, and every letter is a heartbeat. In his silence lies a deeper devotion, not to fame or power, but to memory itself. The scrolls that have been forgotten are not just books that have been lost. They are witnesses to faith, fear, and what people used to believe. They talk about the secrets of heaven, how angels came down, and visions that went beyond the end of time. They talk about prophets who cried for a world that wouldn't listen. They remind us that the sacred used to be huge. It wasn't just one book. It was in many stories and songs, all of which smelled like divine breath, in the dim light of that scriptoria. You can almost hear them still, the whispers between the walls and the ghost of ink drying on parchment. They talk in a soft voice to remind us that no truth is ever really gone. It's just hidden until hearts are ready to hear it again. And maybe that's why these scrolls lasted. There will always be people who look for what has been lost, those who look beyond the limits of what is known, to find the heart of something older, deeper, and more real. Those souls found a home in Ethiopia's monasteries. The scrolls are still there, breathing quietly in the dark. Their words are alive in the rhythm of prayer and chant. The monks' voices rise at night, sending the sound of memory up to the stars. The same stars that once watched the first scribe write still shine somewhere. They are bright, patient, and eternal. Their light shines on the old scrolls like a promise that what was lost will be found again one day. The Ethiopian highlands wake up slowly in the morning, and the sun spills gold across a landscape that seems untouched by time. The mountains go on and on, not just ridges of stone, but also memories. The tops of their mountains are hidden by mist, and their valleys were made by rivers that have sung the same songs for thousands of years. When the wind blows through them, they make a low, steady humming sound, like a hymn that has been forgotten and brought down from heaven. These mountains are not like the others. For the people who live under them, they are living guardians, old watchers who have seen prophets walk, kings kneel, and angels come down. The mountains in Ethiopia seem to breathe at night. The air gets cooler, the stars get closer, and silence falls like a blanket. People who live there say that the earth itself starts to hum, which is a sound you can't record but can feel. They say it's God's voice moving through the stone, a sign that creation still remembers its creator. The rocks are still alive. They are full of stories. Every peak and shadowed valley has something holy in it, like a memory of when heaven touched the earth. This is where faith took root in the ground. Ethiopia's geography is not only beautiful, but it is also sacred. The mountains that make up the country are older than history. Tabor, Simeon, Entoto, and, most importantly, the mountains of Lalibela. If you stand there, you are inside a prayer. The stones aren't just pretty. They're the words of God written in the language of creation. The monks who climb their slopes think that the mountains listen to their prayers and carry them up to the throne of heaven like smoke. And in the middle of this landscape is something amazing. The churches of Lalibela. These are not built. They are carved out of solid rock. Think about how men, hundreds of years ago, stood in front of a mountain and thought that God lived inside it. So they cut down instead of up, which is the opposite of human pride. Instead of building towers that reached the sky, they dug deep into the earth and carved cathedrals out of living stone, as if they were freeing the divine that was already trapped inside. Every column and door was carved by hand. No plans, no tools. Just faith and hard work praying became building. It feels like you're standing in the silence of the earth itself when you're inside one of these churches. The walls are cool and the light is dim, coming through narrow cracks that look like threads of gold. The incense and old dust in the air smell good. People who are on a pilgrimage kneel on the stone with bare feet and put their foreheads on the ground. Their whispered prayers rise and fall with the sound of their breathing, blending with the mountain's hum. This is an unbroken conversation between creation and the Creator. People in Lalibela think their town is like heaven, New Jerusalem carved into the ground. The layout of every hallway and courtyard was meant to show how God wants things to be. There are tunnels and trenches that connect the 12 churches, and each one represents the way to heaven. When pilgrims walk through them, they are walking through the story of how God saved them. The mountain stands above them like a stone guardian angel, silent and eternal, watching over those who dare to look for the sacred hidden in rock. But this holy geography is more than just rocks and quiet. It is about keeping things alive, knowledge, spirit, and things the world forgot. Ethiopia became a safe place for divine secrets, not by chance, but by fate. These mountains stayed the same even when empires were torn apart by wars and holy texts were changed. Being alone became a way to stay safe. Ethiopia hid what the rest of the world destroyed or didn't believe. The land itself became a vessel, a holy chest that kept safe what heaven had once given to earth. People who came here for hundreds of years talked about mysteries. They wrote about priests who could read books that had been lost to other countries, and about libraries that were protected by men who had lived in silence for decades. Some people said that there were scrolls in the monasteries high up on these cliffs that no other country had ever seen. These scrolls told stories of prophets who spoke to angels, visions of worlds before the flood, and hymns sung by the watchers themselves. People who didn't know better thought these stories were legends. But for Ethiopians, they were memories. The mountain of Lalibela, the cliffs of Debradamo, and the caves of Tigray. all became places where things that couldn't be seen were kept. The monks thought they were protecting more than just parchment. They were protecting a living truth. Every prayer, song, and scroll was a piece of heaven's breath. If we lost them, something sacred in the world would be quiet. They built their monasteries in places that were hard to get to, like on cliffs that look like walls of the sky, or in valleys that disappear in the mist. Even today, you have to climb leather ropes or fig tree trunk ladders to get to them. Before it is a journey of distance, it is a journey of faith. People who make it to the top find a world beyond time. The monks walk barefoot and wear white shawls that catch the morning light. As they chant in Ge'ez, the language of angels and the oldest Bible on earth, their voices echo through stone halls. The sound travels over the cliffs, soft and serious, mixing with the cries of birds far away and the wind's whispers. When you hear it, you can feel the old heartbeat of faith. The mountains stay the same when the world below is in chaos, with kingdoms rising and falling, languages changing, and truths being rewritten. They are patient witnesses to the story of God. People say that the Ark of the Covenant stayed in Oxum when it was brought to Ethiopia because that was the land that was chosen. Not because of its power or riches, but because of its silence, the way its mountains could keep a secret and never let it go. The monks tell each other stories about how some of these mountains hum at night, not from the wind or the stone, but from the prayers of saints, scribes, and prophets who lived there long ago. Their voices have become one with the rock. They say the sound is real, but you can only hear it when your heart is calm. The sound of memory is the mountain remembering God's word, so when the Ethiopian highlands shine in the evening and the shadows stretch across the valleys, you're not just looking at a picture. You are looking at a living scripture, a record of what it means to keep faith alive even when no one else is. The mountains keep their secrets not because they want to, but because they are kind. They keep the whispers of heaven safe until the world is ready to hear them again. Something sacred breathes in the stillness of those peaks, where the earth meets the sky. And if you really listen, you might hear it too. The mountain humming the hymns of heaven and keeping the secrets that used to belong to the stars. People used to come together to talk about what was holy and what wasn't. Men in robes and golden crowns sat around wooden tables covered in scrolls in big halls lit by candles. The air was heavy with incense, arguments, and the sound of authority shaking. These were the early centuries of Christianity, when the church tried to bring order to a world that was split by belief. Empires had fallen, prophets had stopped speaking, and letters, gospels, visions, and songs were all over the world. The leaders were more afraid of confusion than heresy, so they got to work picking which words would live and which would die. They called them councils, which were supposed to bring people together, but they often just made them quiet. From Nicaea to Carthage, from Laodicea to Constantinople, people argued about what the truth was and how it should look. What other gospel should be next to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? Which prophet's voice still resonated with God's Spirit? The question was not just about religion. It was also about politics, culture, and people. Some people said that faith should be simple and pure, without too many texts. Some people were afraid that if they cut away too much, they might cut away parts of heaven itself. Picture this: scrolls laid out in front of them, each one written by a shaky hand that thought it was carrying God's word. The Book of Enoch is full of visions of angels and the Watcher's rebellion. The Book of Jubilees, which tells the story of sacred history from creation to the covenant. The Shepherd of Hermas is a story about repentance and dreams from God. They all brought forth, read aloud, and weighed not only in meaning but also in politics. Some bishops frowned, while others talked in hushed tones. And slowly, one by one, people made choices, not the heavens. It was not an evil act. It was a fear-based act. The church wanted things to be clear, organized, and under control. Things were changing too quickly in the world. The Roman Empire was falling apart, and heresy was a threat to unity. The faith needed one canon, one voice, and one Bible to bring people together. And so, texts that talked too much about angels, secrets, or heavenly mysteries were thought to be too risky, too magical. That's too weird. The word apocrypha means hidden, but to hide is also to lose. When the proclamations were made, the scribes who had spent their lives copying those words felt like something inside them died. It was like watching a veil cover light when they saw their favorite stories called forbidden. That day, there were no fires or deaths, just silence. People rolled up scrolls, locked them away, or let them rot in quiet corners of monasteries. The voices of prophets and the songs of old faith were hidden in the shadows. The councils thought they were protecting the truth, but the truth is bigger than walls. What they thought was dangerous might have just been too big for their time. People thought that stories about the watchers who taught people, Enoch walking among angels, and the great flood before Noah were relics of a wild faith that was too close to the fire of heaven. But they were the stories that told us why people wanted to be saved. To get rid of them was to get rid of the questions that made belief what it is. Over the course of hundreds of years, the chosen book spread to other continents, where scribes in monasteries copied them and translated them into Latin, Greek, and other languages. The Bible as we know it today took shape. It was clean, organized, and bound in leather. But underneath all that order was a current of silence, a whisper of what had been left behind. There were echoes of the books that had been forgotten in every gospel's gap and every prophet's pause. But not everyone did. A different story kept going far from Rome, across deserts and seas. Faith took a different path in the highlands of Ethiopia, where the mountains touched the clouds. The people there had learned the teachings long before the councils, and they kept the scriptures as they had first come, whole, uncut, and not afraid of the unknown. The Ethiopian church did not turn away the old words. It kept the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, the stories of Tobit and Sirach, and many others that Europe thought were not true. They didn't see these as wrong. They were holy breaths from the same spirit. Ethiopia chose not to forget, while the rest of the world chose what to remember. Monks kept writing by lamplight in their monasteries high above the valleys, copying every word onto goatskin parchment. They didn't argue about what was good. They kept what was holy. Each letter was a prayer, and each line was a promise to never let the whisper from heaven fade. And by not saying anything, they went against an empire. That defiance is haunting in a way it's not loud or rebellious, but steady and quiet, like a candle that won't go out in the wind. As Europe's libraries changed and scholars said some books were lost, the monks in Ethiopia smiled and kept working. They knew something the councils had forgotten. Faith doesn't mind not knowing everything. To hold on to the unknown is to have faith that God is bigger than what we know. Picture one of those monks, sitting cross-legged in a stone room full of scrolls. His fingers were stained with ink, and his eyes were tired but calm. The smell of rain and dirt is carried by the wind outside. He writes down the names of angels, Enoch's visions, and the songs of the first world inside. He knows that people in other parts of the world have called these stories heresy, but he doesn't care. He doesn't write to get praise. He writes for all time, for hundreds of years. Those manuscripts lay untouched in Ethiopia's stone churches and monasteries, safe from the wars and reforms that swept through Europe. The mountains stayed quiet even when empires fell and libraries burned. The books that were not allowed to be read lived on not because of power, but because of humility. The world had decided to forget, but Ethiopia had decided to remember so. When modern scholars started to find these old texts, again when pieces of Enoch showed up in the caves of Qumran, and the Dead Sea Scrolls talked about angels and secret knowledge, was like the mountains were talking again. Things that were once not allowed began to come back to life. The words that had been lost came back, and the world listened in awe, realizing that the stories they thought were made up had been real all along. Kept safe in Africa, it's easy to forget, but it takes courage to remember. Those councils may have thought they were shaping faith hundreds of years ago, but faith tends to last longer than decisions. The truth they tried to hide kept coming through the cracks, carried by people who wouldn't let heaven's voice be heard. And in the end, it wasn't the empire that kept the light. It was the quiet faith of those who thought that every word written with love was already holy. Ethiopia's defiance was not a rebellion. It was a way to remember. While the world argued, it just kept listening to God in every way he had spoken, even in the pages that other people had set aside. The monks protected the scrolls, the mountains held the words, and the wind carried the hymns through time. In that quiet place, truth waited patiently, knowing that the world would one day come looking for what it had chosen to forget. When the last rays of the sun sink behind the Ethiopian highlands and the soft breath of twilight fills the air, there are whispers that drift between the stones of old monasteries. They are whispers of a library that time could not erase. Monks move like shadows inside those holy walls, their robes brushing against the cool air that is thick with the smell of incense and old parchment. They hold scrolls wrapped in linen and tied with strands of woven thread in their hands. These scrolls hold the voices of ages, the hidden canon of light. These texts tell of a world that most people have forgotten, but Ethiopia has not. It was a world where angels walked among men and heaven and earth were not so far apart. The monks read in silence, by the light of flickering candles, which made halos on the worn pages. The words in front of them are more than just letters. They are living breath that has been echoing since the beginning of time. The Book of Enoch is one of these texts. It is said to have been dictated by an ancient prophet who walked with God and saw things that no one else could see. He wrote about the watchers, divine secrets, and heavenly laws, a flood that was still to come, and a son of man who would one day judge. There is a rhythm on each page that seems to come from another world, like heaven itself breathed through the ink. When read aloud in the quiet of night, the air in the monastery seems to shimmer, as if the world that can't be seen is listening to its own old song again. Next is the Book of Jubilees, which has been around for hundreds of years and is made of parchment. This text tells the story of time itself, showing how sacred jubilees and heavenly cycles made by divine hands divided the universe, not human calendars. Angels are not far away in it. They are heavenly scribes who taught Adam and his children the order of creation. It reinterprets Genesis, not merely as a narrative of origins, but as a blueprint of divine purpose. Reading it is like following the memory of heaven and feeling the pulse of a world that was in harmony with its creator before it fell into darkness. Then, in another bundle of manuscripts, there is a name that few people know: the Maccabean books. These Ethiopian scriptures are different from the Greek Maccabees that people in the West know. They have their own light and talk about wars fought with faith and endurance, not just swords. They tell of rebels who fought against tyranny with devotion and saw battle as both physical and spiritual. These men and women were as brave as angels who stood before their Maker and refused to kneel to darkness. The rhythm of these stories moves the soul, as if to remind the reader that divine truth isn't always found in the most well-known texts, but sometimes in the quiet persistence of the forgotten. The Ascension of Isaiah is another one that is very mysterious. The pages glow with a strange beauty. They show visions of the prophet being lifted through the 7 heavens by angels and led through realms of bright fire and light. Isaiah sees the eternal fight between pride and purity, between angels who serve and angels who fall. But the most important part of the text is when he sees the Messiah coming down from the heavens in humility, taking on human form and walking among people who don't know who he is. The story unfolds like a vision from God, full of sadness and wonder. The monks' eyes shine in the candlelight as they softly say it, as if they could feel the bridge between heaven and earth shaking. There is more to each of these texts than just parchment and ink. They are doors that were hidden from the world a long time ago. It is not by chance that they are in Ethiopia. It is by God's will. For hundreds of years, while other countries argued over which books were worthy of divine status, Ethiopia just protected what was given to it. The monks didn't want to argue. They wanted to protect. Their silence was a kind of holy defiance, a refusal to let a law stop the light from shining. They thought that every scroll, line, and breath of divine inspiration should be remembered. Picture how quiet it was in the monastery at night. The wind whispered outside, the steady hum of prayer echoed off the old stone, and the sound of papyrus rustling as one page turned to the next. Their devotion has a rhythm, a beat that links the past and the present. The monks think that copying a holy text makes you part of its holiness. Every stroke of ink is a prayer, and every letter connects to something that will last forever. The scribe's quill moves not only because of skill, but also because of faith, following the divine pattern of memory itself. These people are not just scholars. They are the keepers of heaven's lost archive as dawn approaches. You might hear the faintest sound, as if the scrolls themselves are breathing. They have waited centuries for eyes that see beyond religion and empire, for hearts that feel truth not as doctrine but as wonder. These books have kept watch in silence, keeping secrets that the world was once afraid to know. The Book of Enoch talks about angels who have fallen and are teaching forbidden knowledge. The rhythm of cosmic order runs through jubilees. Maccabean burns with courage and devotion. Ascension of Isaiah glows with prophecy and transcendence. Together, they form a constellation of knowledge, each text a star in the dark sky of human forgetfulness, each one keeping the light alive and still. They endure resting in monasteries carved into mountains, wrapped in cloth, kissed by the smoke of ancient incense. Generations of monks have walked those same stone corridors, their footsteps echoing softly through the ages. Outside, the world changed. Kingdoms rose and fell, wars were fought, languages died. But within these walls, time stands still. The words remain, the prayers continue, the light never fades. For the Ethiopians who guard them, these texts are not lost relics. They are living witnesses. They are the proof that truth cannot be destroyed, only hidden for a time, waiting for the right hands to uncover it. And as candlelight dances across the faces of those silent readers, one realizes something profound. Even when the world chooses to forget, light remembers. The hidden library breathes still, its pages humming softly in the night, waiting for the world to remember its voice once more, before kingdoms and even the first stone temples. A man walked in the quiet of the world's first dawns. His footsteps sounded different from everyone else's. He was named Enoch, and he was a real person, not a myth. He wasn't a king or a warrior, and he didn't wear gold or have a lot of people around him. Instead, he was a shepherd of silence and a listener of winds that carried the breath of God. Enoch walked with God, while other people worked in the sun or built cities out of dust. And one day, while the world slept under the same sky he often looked up at, he disappeared, not by death, but by invitation. People say that he was taken, body and soul, to places where no one can go. What did he see in that vast space where stars seem to bow to laws that can't be seen? The scriptures don't say much, as if even heaven was too shy to tell us what Enoch saw. But through ancient words, faint as whispers carried across thousands of years, we can see parts of his journey. Celestial halls filled with fire and light, angels whose voices echo through time, and visions so big that the earth itself would shake to hold them. Like many other stories, Enoch's begins in a time when people still remembered how close they were to God. He lived 7 generations after Adam, long before the flood, when the stars looked closer and the air was still young. In those days, men still built altars by hand and looked up at the sky in awe instead of using science. But Enoch was different from all of them. He didn't want knowledge to be proud or power to rule. He just wanted to understand. He talked to the unseen like a friend. He didn't see the rhythm of life as something to figure out. He saw it as a song to which he could walk in time. That might be why God picked him. The Bible says, "And Enoch walked with God. Then he was no more, for God took him." But there is so much more to this one sentence. What does it mean for a person to walk with the infinite all the time, not just for a short time? To live in such harmony with the Creator that the line between heaven and earth fades away, until one day there is no line left. The silence that follows his disappearance feels like reverence itself, as if the earth held its breath, realizing that one of its own had crossed over to glory without dying. The Book of Enoch, which has been kept in the heart of Ethiopia long after other countries forgot about it, talks about his journey as an ascension, not an ending. He was taken up through the many layers of heaven by glowing beings, each one more beautiful, pure, and amazing than the last. He saw the architecture of the cosmos, stars that moved in perfect harmony, the sun and moon following their paths, and the winds doing what they were told by the heavens. He learnt the order of creation not through symbols or riddles, but through living truth, every law of the universe pulsing with the heartbeat of the divine. Then there were the angels, not the painted cherubs of later times, but powerful beings of light whose shapes shimmered with power that was beyond understanding. Enoch saw their ranks, their jobs, and the songs of praise that never stopped. He saw those who had always been faithful and those who had fallen from their first state, and were now chained in the dark for their rebellion. They taught men forbidden knowledge, like how to make weapons, read stars, and use vanity and war to get what they want. God showed Enoch their names, sins, and fates. He saw the sad beauty of creation, that there was choice even in heaven, and that pride, could grow even among the stars. He wasn't just a witness. He was a message bearer. Uriel, Raphael, and other angels who helped him showed him the secrets of mercy and judgment. They talked about the flood that was coming, how it would clean up the world, and how a new day would dawn after the destruction. And when Enoch's spirit came back to earth, he had those visions in his heart like fire. He became the voice of warning for generations that had lost sight of what was holy. But he didn't just say things out of fear. They brought hope, the promise that light would win out, and that goodness would not disappear from the world. You can almost picture him standing under the stars, with the air shimmering with an unseen presence and his eyes turned up to the heavens that once welcomed him. Maybe he felt a faint pull from that divine realm, a voice that kept telling him he didn't fully belong to the earth anymore. People who saw him might have seen something otherworldly in his eyes, as if he had stars in his eyes that no one else had ever seen. He talked about balance, harmony, and a world made up of love and justice. His words were like poetry from the other side. But like all prophets, people didn't understand Enoch. His revelations were too big for people to understand. The wisdom he had was like a fire that both lit up and scared people. It talked about moral laws that even angels had to follow and a moral order that was older than time itself. People stopped using his writings because they were too alive, too wild, and too close to the truth. But Ethiopia did not turn away. The monks of old wrote down his words by hand, their ink gliding across parchment in the dark, keeping the voice of the man who never died. The mystery of Enoch grew deeper over the course of hundreds of years. His name came up again in the Bible, where it was used to describe someone who had faith and pleased God. His story is echoed in the New Testament, which reminds us that immortality does not come from power, but from living in harmony with God. The prophet who never died became a bridge between worlds, a symbol of the highest desire of all people, to be close to the Creator and see and know what lies beyond the veil. Even now, when you stand on the mountains of Ethiopia, where old churches are carved into living rock and the night sky is full of silent fires, you can almost feel him there. The wind whispers through the highlands like a memory of his trip. Somewhere, deep within those stars, Enoch's path still shines. It is a thread of light that weaves through the heavens, reminding everyone that there was once a man who walked with God until heaven took him completely. Maybe that's why his story lives. A nit, not a myth, but a memory that won't go away. In Enoch, we see what people were meant to be, not beings made of dust, but souls who can be friends with God. He is the promise that the gap between heaven and earth isn't as big as it seems. In the stillness of faith and the quiet awe of creation, you might still hear that same gentle call, "Walk with me." Before the flood, when the stars shone brighter than the hearts of men, the heavens shook. The sky looked like it was leaning closer to the ground, as if it was listening to something it shouldn't have. The watchers came down from that silence. They were angels dressed in fire and light, shining like the dawn. They didn't come in anger. They came in awe. Their eyes saw the daughters of men, and their hearts were filled with a strange desire. They were beings from higher realms who were not affected by death. But something about the weakness of people drew them in. The warmth of love, the sweetness of imperfection, and the fleeting beauty that only death makes sacred. At first, it seemed like a miracle that they fell. The night sparkled where they walked, and men listened where they spoke. They knew things that no one on earth knew, like how to make things in heaven, the secrets of the stars, and the music of creation that is hidden. People welcomed them as teachers and friends of God. They shared their gifts while the mountains watched and the winds blew. They taught each other how to shape metal, how to decorate the eyes, and how to read the stars. The earth, which was once innocent and raw, grew strange new wisdom. But that wisdom made them hungry to own, to control, and to know what should stay hidden. Shemyezer was their leader, and no one in the group was as smart as he was. He wasn't bad at first. He was just interested in the world below, in the beating of human hearts and the whisper of earthly desires. But if you don't keep an eye on it, curiosity can turn into rebellion. One by one, 200 other angels joined him on the top of Mount Hermon, where they made a deal. They made a promise that if one of them fell, all of them would fall too. Heaven itself cannot bind what is not born of obedience, so the sky shook at their vow. When they came down to earth, their light dimmed and their wings touched the dust of death. They got caught up in the struggles of humanity because they loved it. They got married and had kids, the Nephilim, who were strong and famous. These children, who were not fully angels or men, became restless and angry, wanting to rule over all of creation. The world's balance started to fall apart. The gifts that used to make people happy now ruined everything. Weapons of war came from the forges of heaven's secrets. False prophecies and pride came from the stars' divine knowledge. The Watchers had not only given people knowledge, they had also started the first fire of corruption in the human heart. The weight of it made the earth groan. The rivers turned red, and the cries rose to the sky, the sound of the children of angels eating up innocence. The Creator was sad, and his patience lasted. For he had a messenger, someone who had been with him and seen the stars in harmony and the order of the universe. Enoch, the man who used to walk among angels, was called again. This time, he was not to see the wonders of heaven, but to testify against those who had fallen from it. It wasn't easy, because he knew the Watchers well. He knew how smart they were and how beautiful their first obedience was. But he also knew the fire that was consuming them now, a fire of regret and defiance burning side by side. Their glory had already faded when Enoch got close. Their shapes glimmered like starlight fading away. Some cried and covered their faces with shaking hands, while others stood up to them, their eyes still proud and refused to bow. They begged him to speak to God for them. They thought that the one who had once walked with God might still be able to change his mind, and Enoch, out of pity, did something that few people would dare to do. He stood between heaven and the fallen, feeling both sorry and scared. He took their requests to the Most High and rose again in spirit to the realms of light. But when he got to the bright halls of eternity, he knew the answer. Mercy had been given long ago, and now justice would come. The Watchers had ruined what was holy by teaching people to worship knowledge instead of the one who gave it to them. Their punishment wasn't just for disobeying. It was also for twisting love into something else, like turning divine love into earthly desire. When Enoch came back with the order, the air itself seemed to be sad. The wind on the mountain howled like people crying. He told them in a soft, shaky voice, "You will have no peace. Your children will die, and your spirits will be bound beneath the earth until the end of time." Some of the Watchers fell to their knees, their tears shining like molten gold, but others turned away and went back into shadows that were darker than night. The fire that used to burn in them turned into chains of flame that were invisible but couldn't be broken. And yet, there is still a question behind their rebellion that goes deep into the human soul. What makes forbidden knowledge so tempting? What makes the heart want what it can't have? The Watchers weren't monsters. They were people looking for something they didn't understand. We see a part of ourselves in them, the never-ending human desire to touch the infinite, even if it means falling. The fire they carried was the same fire that makes people want to climb mountains of truth, build towers of Babel, and look for meaning in places they shouldn't. Their fall was sad, not because of hate, but because of love that wasn't protected. It reminds us that even the brightest light can cast the darkest shadow when it is turned away from its source. Enoch saw both sides, the beauty of what they made and the sadness of what they lost. He understood that every person has a battle inside them between wonder and rebellion, between curiosity and obedience. He knew that knowledge could either light the way or burn it. Enoch would often look up at the sky at night, when the stars twinkled like embers on a vast sea. Maybe he thought that some of that light belonged to the watchers, who were always far away and whose brilliance was trapped in the cold silence of space. Their legacy lived on in the hearts of men, in every search for hidden knowledge, and in every whispered temptation to be like gods. But even though there was still sadness, there was also a promise that the Creator's plan would live on even after the rebellion. Enoch's message was not one of hopelessness, but of awakening. He said that true knowledge isn't wrong, it's just used wrong. That sacred mysteries should be approached with reverence rather than prideful grasp. He told everyone that the fire of heaven is a holy thing that should not be stolen but humbly accepted. And so, even though the watchers fell, their story became a mirror lesson written in flame in the sky that taught everyone that the way to light does not begin with reaching up carelessly, but with walking humbly beneath the stars. And there, in that balance between curiosity and faith, Enoch's legacy lives on. He was the voice of someone who saw angels burn for love but still believed that heaven's mercy could one day turn even their ashes into light. They lived in the shadows of mountains, where clouds touched the ground, and the wind carried the smell of incense. Rain and prayers mixed together. These were the prophets who had been forgotten. They were not famous or well known through scripture, but rather humble people who wrote in silence with ink as dark as the night sky. People never said their words in court or in cities. They only whispered them to stones, the air, and God. They didn't want to be remembered, but somehow time remembered them. Their writings, which are old and fragile, still exist in the ancient language of Ge'ez, like the breath of a world that has disappeared but won't go away completely. In small monasteries, carved into rock deep in the Ethiopian highlands, monks still whisper their names, or what is left of them. No one knows what they looked like or where they went, but their words come alive again in the soft light of candles. Each verse feels like a heartbeat from a different time, slow and steady, not broken by the passage of time. When the wind blows through the narrow stone corridors, it sounds like those voices are still talking, but not loudly or in a commanding way. They are soft, steady, and patient. They talk about patience because they lived by it. They talk about endurance because they needed it. And they talk about faith because that's all they had left. Picture one of them, an old man hunched over a piece of parchment, his hands shaking not from age but from fear. There are bugs buzzing outside, and inside, a single flame fights to stay alive in the draft. Each stroke of his quill is a prayer, and it moves slowly. He doesn't write for people to read. He writes for God to see. His words aren't rules. They're prayers, lines of love sent to the Creator, questions whispered into eternity, and answers that may never come. He stops a lot to listen to the silence, as if he expects God's voice to come from the stone walls. And when there is no sound, he writes again, because faith means writing even when heaven is quiet, a long way off. Another prophet might have walked along the ridge of a mountain at dawn, with the mist clinging to his robes. He has no book or staff, just his memory. His scriptures are written in his heart, in the way he walks, and in the tears he sheds for the morning light. He sees the world as a temple and the rising sun as a sign. He talks to the mountains like they can hear him, and maybe they can. In that stillness, the earth and sky seem so close that you could touch them, and every gust of wind sounds like a line spoken by God. These prophets did not share a common belief system or a legal obligation. They were drawn together by a deep desire, the same desire that moved Enoch, Isaiah, and every other person who has ever looked beyond the visible world and felt the weight of eternity pressing gently on their chest. Their time alone wasn't empty. It was a time of connection. They found the divine presence more clearly in silence than they ever could in words. They spent their days slowly praying and fasting, and their nights were full of dreams that were full of symbols that only heaven could explain. They sometimes wrote about visions, not of thunder or anger, but of light that moved like a living thing, flowing over the mountains and touching every stone. They wrote about angels as peacekeepers, not warriors, and said that their wings protected the earth from sadness. They wrote about love not as desire, but as sacrifice. The kind of love that gives without asking and believes even when it can't be seen. Reading their words today is like stepping into a dream. The sentences breathe softly, like a lullaby you half remember from childhood, a melody that brings both mystery and comfort. When the world started to change, when rulers demanded orthodoxy in councils, decided which books would live and which would die, many of their scrolls were hidden. But in Ethiopia, the mountains were their protectors. The air was thin there, and the paths were dangerous. Maybe that's why the flames of forgetfulness never reached those peaks. Monks put the manuscripts in caves, wrapped them in linen, sealed them with wax and prayer, and then put them away. For hundreds of years, empires rose and fell, but the voices of the prophets slept under the ground like seeds waiting for rain. Even now, when scholars find a piece of writing, the words feel warm, as if the ink still remembers who wrote it. The GS script curls like tendrils of smokehold, graceful and full of life. You can almost hear the old prophets' chants and the soft rise and fall of their breath as they prayed for a world they would never see when you read it out loud. Miracles didn't show how devoted they were. Persistence did. They had the quiet faith to keep talking even when no one listened. And maybe that's why their legacy lives on. Because faith, like theirs, doesn't need to be seen. It can be found in places that aren't visible, like the corners of monasteries, the sigh of a monk turning a page, or the echo of a prayer said before dawn. The names are gone, but their presence is still there, like incense that can't be seen but smells good. They remind us that not all prophets should be known. Some things are meant to be felt, like the quiet before the morning bell or the warmth of a candle on a cold night. Their lack of clarity is very human. To write knowing that no one will ever read it, and to pray knowing that no one will remember your name, this is the purest form of love. They didn't know it, but their solitude was a gift to the world. Because they were alone, they kept something eternal, the truth that even silence can carry prophecy, and even the smallest act of devotion can last forever. When the sun goes down over Ethiopia and the bells ring from faraway monasteries, the mountains seem to hum with that old music again. The voices of the forgotten prophets rise like fog, filling the valleys with memories. The earth seems to be singing their words back to heaven, keeping their promise alive. And those who really listen can still hear it, but not with their ears. They can hear it with their spirit. There is no beginning or end to that quiet song, only the never-ending talk between the human heart and the divine, between the prophets who wrote by starlight and those who are still looking for meaning in the dark. The mountains, which have been there forever, hold their secrets like they are protecting not just parchment and ink, but the heartbeat of faith itself, which is steady, unbroken, and eternal. The noise of swords and the sight of armies marching across kingdoms did not give birth to their songs. The Maccabean, whose stories are quietly told in the Ethiopian scriptures, sang under the open sky. Their bravery came not from fighting, but from deep within themselves. In the West, the name Maccabees brings to mind images of rebellion and warriors fighting against tyranny. The Maccabean in the Ethiopian Bible, on the other hand, are different. They are softer, deeper, and almost dreamlike in their defiance. They fought against more than just kings and oppressors. They also fought against their own despair, when everything around them seemed to be in the dark. They stood up for the light of faith. Their stories hum like the light of an oil lamp in a small room, where a few faithful people pray while the world outside shakes. The Maccabean brothers lived in a time of loss and confusion, when idols took the place of truth and prophets were silenced by the powerful. But in that silence, they heard something old, a call not to war, but to remember. Their bravery was not a roar, but a whisper, and their hearts did not give up. They did not hear swords clashing. They were regular guys who found incredible strength in their faith. They thought that the best way to rebel was to stay pure when the world wanted them to give in. When you read their songs, it sounds like the wind blowing through tall grass in a field that hasn't been used in a long time. It's soft and slow, but it has a lot of presence. Each verse talks about staying strong, not winning. Even when flames were rising around them and friends and family were giving in, they refused to bow to false gods. They were brave not because they won, but because they stayed strong. That is beautiful, the kind that doesn't fade away, the kind that stays after all the fighting is over. Their song was not "we won," but "we stayed." In one story, a Maccabean brother faces death with an unusual calmness. Even though enemies are getting closer, his words are calm. "We do not fear," he says. "Our bodies are only clay, but the fire of our Lord burns beyond the grave." This line sounds like a prayer caught between bravery and giving up. Their defiance is hauntingly beautiful. They didn't fight to be in charge. They fought to stay true. And that truth, pure and unbroken, shines brighter than any sword could. Their fight was inside, like a mirror for every believer who has ever doubted in the dark. What is left when everything seems to be lost? Faith, not as blind obedience, but as quiet trust. The Maccabean tell us that faith doesn't need the noise of certainty. It lives in the quiet rhythm of endurance, even when heaven seems far away and prayers go unanswered. Their story tells us that God hears us through silence, patience, and pain. Picture them sitting on the cold ground under a starry sky, holding hands and speaking with trembling but strong voices. The air around them is thick with fear, but the stars above them are still there, far away and unchanging. That same quietness gave them the strength to be brave. They thought that the heavens were always watching, even when the world turned away. They thought of faith as a light that guides them, not a fire that burns them. It was like a lamp that they carried with them through the night. Step by step, Their songs, which are in Ge'ez, are simple and beautiful. The beat sounds old, like water flowing through stone halls. They talk about obedience, not as giving in, but as freedom, the freedom to be part of something bigger than fear. They thought of life as a journey, with every problem being a test of faith. Some people saw death as a loss, but they saw it as a return. From that point of view, their pain became holy. The Maccabean thought that real courage is not killing the enemy, but forgiving them, and standing firm without hate. The Western Maccabees, on the other hand, were warriors of fire and fury, heroes of action. But the Ethiopian Maccabean were warriors of silence. They fought without weapons and won over temptation instead of land. Their songs don't march, they breathe. Their rhythm is made up of night and prayer and tears that have become hymns. They were men who thought that peace, not victory, and faithfulness, not rebellion, would last forever. People in Ethiopia's highlands don't often talk about them, but their legacy lives on like a secret song. Their stories, which are written in a language older than kingdoms, are full of hope and desire. They talk to everyone who has ever felt small in the face of evil but refused to give up. In their defiance, they did not seek recognition. They sought righteousness, and that might be what makes their bravery last forever. The Maccabean knew that every act of faith has effects that go beyond the moment and echo through time. They lit a candle that still burns in the hearts of those who read their words today. When they chose devotion over despair and obedience over fear, their story shows us that even the tiniest light can shine through the darkest places, and that strength is not in power but in patience. In their silence, there is music. In their pain, there is song. Their voices come from the mountains and the valleys where old churches are carved into stone. The wind that blows through those holy halls still seems to carry their prayer. Hold on, even when the night is long. The Maccabean thought that God's timing is slow but sure, and that faith is not about seeing but about staying. Their bravery wasn't loud, but it lasted. It was the kind that burns slowly and lasts for hundreds of years. Their song, sung in the old language of Ge'ez, has the beat of heart that would not bend. Even though most of the world doesn't know what they said, their words live on, like distant stars that are faint but eternal, lighting the way for those who walk through darkness with faith as their only fire. The story starts with a prophet lying still and meditating, his heart open to the call of God. Isaiah, who is tired of all the sadness in the world, feels the earth move away from him as his spirit begins to rise. He doesn't climb with steps or wings. He climbs with light that is soft, never-ending, and pure. Every breath gets softer and every thought gets quieter until the world lets go of its grip. The heavens open up in front of him, one above the other, each one brighter than the last, sparkling like layers of eternity. His rise is not quick. It is slow, like dawn spreading over a sleeping sky. Isaiah finds peace in the first heaven. The air feels alive in this soft, glowing world, and the songs of invisible beings flow like water. The souls here are calm, their faces are peaceful, and their clothes are as white as the moon. They don't say anything to him. They just show up, which is a feeling of recognition that goes beyond sound. It is the beginning of heaven, where prayers rise like soft mist. Isaiah feels the weight of fear on earth lift off of him. That bright calm makes all of his past sorrows go away. He understands that peace isn't the absence of things, but the presence of things. It's not silence, but harmony. The light turns to gold when he goes up to the second heaven. The air is full of respect, and big angels move through flames like wind. Their eyes are kind but fierce, and their beauty is too much to handle. This is the place of strength, where divine order stands strong against the chaos below. Isaiah sees the records of souls written on shimmering scrolls, and each name shines with its own light. Here, he learns that justice isn't punishment, it's balance. Every action, thought, and act of kindness sends waves out into the world, changing the pattern of creation. The angels tell him that even sadness can be useful to God. If you handle it with grace, the third heaven opens up like a huge garden full of stars. Beside rivers of crystal, trees of light grow, and every leaf seems to whisper praise. Isaiah walks among souls who used to live on earth, and they are now bright and free of pain. Their laughter sounds like bells ringing in the distance. He sees what love really is in this world, not wanting, not owning, but being one. Every soul is linked, and every heart shows how merciful God is. He feels his own heart grow until it beats in time with the universe. He seems to be both himself and everything else, breathing with one endless pulse. The fourth heaven rises in a silver mist that is too quiet to describe. Here live the great archangels, huge, shining beings whose presence makes even light seem small. They are in circles of fire that don't burn but clean. Isaiah sees how time works, how stars are born, and how destinies are woven. The archangels don't talk about power, they talk about purpose. They tell him that everything in the world sings and that every soul has a part in the divine symphony. The music shakes when one stops talking, and when one comes back, everything is back in order. Isaiah cries, not because he's scared, but because he's in awe of how everything, even pain, has a place in that eternal melody. As he climbs higher into the fifth heaven, the brightness turns into blue, which is a never-ending sea of peace. This is where the souls of the faithful rest, in a light that seems alive. Angels move like soft clouds, taking prayers from the ground to the throne above. There is no judgment here, just remembering every moment lived in faith with love. Isaiah can feel the beat of God's forgiveness. He sees how mercy falls like rain on all hearts, washing away guilt and bringing back what was lost. He learns the truth about grace here, that it is not something you earn, but something you are given that comes from the heart of God. There is translucent fire in the sixth heaven. The air is full of power, and there are choirs of seraphim singing songs that are too big for words. Their voices sound like the beginning of the world, a mix of thunder and whisper. This is the realm of God's will, where love bends light to its will. Isaiah sees all the angels, from the smallest guardians to the biggest thrones, moving together in perfect harmony. He sees the prayers of people on earth rise like sparks into the hands of seraphim. The seraphim then turn them into flames of blessing and send them back down. Every sound and every movement has a purpose. Isaiah sees that heaven is not a place but a motion in this sea of brilliance. It is a living harmony between the Creator and creation. Then comes the seventh heaven, which is the highest and most holy of all. The light here is not too bright. It is soft, endless, and has no color or shadow. It feels like love itself, unmeasured, eternal, and endless. Isaiah shakes because he knows he is close to the presence that no one else has seen. Many angels bow down around him in silence, their faces hidden and their songs silent. The Eternal One lives in the middle, on a throne of living light. Isaiah isn't scared. He's just amazed. The divine gaze does not come down on him as fire, but as peace. He sees everything in that look, the beauty of creation, the sadness of sin, and the hope of salvation. He can't hear the voice that speaks to him, but he can feel it, like warmth spreading through his body. It tells him that love is light and truth is light. It tells him that every soul's journey is like his own rise to the divine. All beings rise towards the divine through struggle and surrender, faith and forgiveness. The voice talks about purity, which isn't the same as perfection. It's being open enough for the divine to shine through. Isaiah knows that the goal of all life is to reflect that eternal light. He sees a vision of the world below as he looks at the light. It's fragile, imperfect, and loved. He sees people praying, crying, and hoping. He can see the threads of light that connect every heart, no matter how lost it is, to heaven. The Eternal tells him that no one is ever forgotten and that the way to heaven is not just by climbing up, but also by caring for others. Isaiah's spirit is full of peace. He knows he has to go back to bear witness and remind the world that there is light waiting for them beyond their pain light that is pure, forgiving, and eternal. He slowly comes down from the heavens again, carrying their light with him. As he walks by, the angels bow, and each realm leaves a mark on his soul: peace, justice, love, wisdom, mercy, power, and truth. The air feels different, thicker, and dimmer when his spirit comes back to earth. But the fire of heaven still burns inside him. Words are too small for him to say everything he has seen, but his eyes show the reflection of forever. He moves through the world slowly, with a soft but sure voice. He carries the memory of light beyond light, the promise that every soul will rise in time. The story of Hermes starts in the quiet parts of the ancient world, where the noise of empires fades away and only the sound of one's own thoughts remains. He wasn't a prophet, a priest, or a scholar of law or scripture. He was just a regular guy with a kind heart who made his living in the back streets of Rome. His hands were rough from working, his days were long and quiet, and his heart, though tired, still held on to faith. But at night, when the city was quiet and asleep, Hermes didn't dream of the world. He dreamed of heaven. And in these dreams, angels began to tell him about things that will last forever, like forgiveness, repentance, and love that is greater than judgment. People said that Hermes had his first vision while walking down a deserted road. The sun had just set behind the hills, and the air was calm. He felt a strange calm come over him, the kind that makes the world stop for a second. Then he saw her, a beautiful woman in white with a staff of light. Her eyes were kind, but they also seemed to see through him, as if they could see all of his pain and secrets. She called him by name, not to scold him, but like a mother would call her child. She spoke softly and said that God had chosen him to learn through visions so that he could help others turn away from their sins. At that moment, Hermes was scared and amazed at the same time. He wasn't good at talking and didn't have the right to preach. How could this job be his? But the woman's voice was soft, like wind through olive leaves, and she told him that God does not want the proud or the perfect, but those who are willing to listen. Her message was clear: ask for forgiveness, repent, and rebuild the broken walls of faith in your heart. She told him that repentance is not punishment, but a return to the light that the soul had forgotten. Days went by, and Hermes still couldn't shake the vision. He would look towards the fading light each night when the streets were quiet and wonder if the woman of light would come back. And she did. He saw a tower being built in another dream. It was a tall, bright structure that rose towards heaven. The stones that made up the tower were people, and their souls were joined together to make a home for God. Some stones were perfect, smooth, and fit right into the walls, while others were cracked or misshaped and set aside for cleaning. The woman said that the tower was the church, but not one made of bricks and mortar. It was made up of hearts that were united in faith. Those who turned away from sin and accepted forgiveness would find their place in that tower. Those who hardened their hearts would fall away like dust in the wind. Hermas listened in awe. He saw the meaning of repentance in this vision, not as fear, but as healing. Grace could change every soul, no matter how broken it was. Even things that were broken could be fixed. In his dream, the tower got taller and brighter, as if the light came from inside. He understood that this was how heaven was built, one act of mercy after another, one forgiven soul at a time, as Hermos's visions went on. He met other heavenly beings, like angels who were bright and quiet and had power. One was called the shepherd and wore simple clothes like a traveler. His face was kind, and his eyes were as clear as the sky. He walked next to Hermas with a staff, like a friend would. The shepherd told him that he had been sent to teach him how to be patient, humble, and persistent. His words weren't loud or commanding. They were soft and sounded like things you already knew deep down. He told Hermas that true faith is not shown by miracles or strength, but by steadfastness, the quiet strength of a soul that keeps believing through every trial. The shepherd often talked about forgiving others and oneself. He told Hermas that a lot of people fall short not because they don't love God, but because they can't forgive themselves for their mistakes. He said that forgiveness must flow through the heart like air flows through the lungs. Without it, the spirit is choked by guilt. When Hermas heard these words, he cried because he had a lot of regrets. Things he had said in anger, things he had not done, and times when he had doubted God's mercy. But the shepherd put his hand on Hermos's shoulder and said, "Don't let your sadness keep you from living. The door to forgiveness is repentance. Open it, and you'll find peace." Every night, Hermos's dreams were like soft lessons, full of symbols that spoke to both his mind and his soul. He saw rivers of light washing away darkness, trees blooming after long winters, and lambs sleeping next to lions. These pictures weren't about punishment or fear. They were about renewal, the gentle return of harmony. Hermas started to understand that repentance wasn't about giving up, but about having hope that no matter how far someone has gone, the way home is never closed. His days were simple and his life was quiet, but inside him, a big change was happening. The visions changed the way he thought about the world. He started to see beauty in things that used to be work, like the way the morning light shone on the stones, the sound of kids laughing on the street, and the kindness in a stranger's eyes. He understood that every time he showed love, he was getting a glimpse of heaven, and every time he forgave someone, he was praying. He believed that God was speaking to him through the world around him, through the wind, the rain, and the hearts of those who still had hope. Hermas saw a big book in one vision. Its pages shone like the sun. The shepherd told him that it held the names of everyone who wanted to repent. There was light on every name and every soul, no matter how small. But the pages were still open and waiting. "The book is never done," the shepherd said. "Each moment of love, each act of mercy, writes another line." Hermas's heart raced as he realized that the story of heaven was still being written, not in the stars, but in the hearts of those who forgive. Hermas kept telling people what he had seen over the years, but not as a preacher. He spoke softly, like a father talking to his kids at night, telling them that they shouldn't be afraid of repentance, but should welcome it. He told them that heaven hears when a soul says, "I will try again." His words spread slowly, not because he was famous, but because he meant what he said. His message gave people hope. No heart is too lost to be found, and no wound is too deep to be healed. Hermas still walked with the same calmness and gentleness, even after his visions faded and his hair turned silver. People who met him said that being around him was like being in still water and reflecting something bigger than himself. Maybe it was the shepherd's voice still guiding him, or maybe it was the light of repentance that never left his soul. He lived the way he had been taught, with humility, kindness, and forgiveness. Even though the Shepherd of Hermas became one of the first Christian books, at its heart it was still the story of a man who dreamed of angels and found peace so deep in those dreams that it lasted forever. Time itself was born at the beginning, not just of light and sky, but of rhythm and breath. Not the kind of time that people measure with sand or shadow, but holy time, living time, the pulse of the divine heartbeat. The Book of Jubilees calls it the counting of days, a secret calendar that shows creation not as a single spark, but as a song sung in perfect order. It says that every event, from the birth of the first light to the rise of humankind, was part of a cycle of divine intention, that heaven keeps its own calendar by measuring in jubilees, which are long periods of sacred years. These quiet pages hold a genesis that is different from the one the world remembers. It is older, slower, and more complicated, as if the Creator shaped existence to music that no longer reaches human ears. People say that the angel of the presence stood in front of Moses on the mountain, covered in a light that was too bright to burn. The air looked like still water, and the voice that spoke was both a thunderstorm and a lullaby. The angel said that creation was not chaos being brought to order, but harmony happening in holy time. The heavens and the earth, the waters and the sky, they all came into being not just by command, but by the rhythm of Jubilee. One age came after another, like one breath coming after another. The angel said that to understand creation, you shouldn't look at the stars. Instead, you should listen to the silence between them, where you could hear the measure of divine time. The Book of Jubilees talks about the sevenfold order of everything. Creation happens in sevens of years, sevens of generations, and sevens of ages, just like the week has 7 days. The cycles are like the patterns in the sky, like the stars moving, the moon turning, and the seasons breathing. It says that the structure of existence was written like a poem, and that angels were put in charge of keeping this rhythm. They kept an eye on the sun's path, the moon's phases, and the secret doors that opened at dawn and dusk. They kept the balance of creation, and their song kept the music of divine time going. But this Genesis has secrets that the well-known story doesn't. It says that the angels were already naming the hours before Adam opened his eyes, that they set the limits of time before the first rain, breaking eternity into cycles that would guide both heaven and earth. The first light that touched the void didn't cause chaos. It brought order back to life. It was a pulse through the universe, steady as a heartbeat. Every act of creation was a step in a divine procession, and every moment was a note in the great hymn of life. And when the seventh day came, it wasn't just a day of rest. It was a day of reunion, when creation came back to its source. Jubilees also talks about the watchers of time, who are not fallen angels, but holy beings who kept track of everything that happened and every breath of history. They didn't write with ink. They wrote with light, carving the actions of both men and angels into the fabric of eternity. People say that nothing goes unnoticed in the divine calendar. Even silence is written down, and even waiting is measured. The book says that an angel told it to remind people of this hidden rhythm because people were starting to forget the sacred order. The seasons of the world were no longer in sync with the heartbeat of creation. Time, which used to be sacred, was now just a clock. The story goes on with Adam's children, who each generation moves through the cycles of the divine. It was as if heaven itself kept track of Adam, Seth, and Enosh's lives by counting them in jubilees instead of years. It tells the story of Noah, who was born in the 14th Jubilee after Adam. His fate was written long before the flood happened. His story also follows the sacred calendar, 40 days of rain, 40 nights of cleansing, all in the right order. The book says that the flood wasn't just destruction. It was also renewal, a washing of time so that it could start over, clean and in line with divine order. The first time we see Abraham's name, it is in this same measured pattern. The angel tells Moses that God had a plan for Abraham's life as well. His travels, his tests, and his promise all happened during set jubilees, which were the same cycles that started at the beginning of time. The promise of stars, the offering on the mountain, and the covenant of circumcision all show how heaven is built. Abraham is not only the father of nations, but also the keeper of the sacred rhythm, the one who walks in time as God planned. His obedience is a song, and his faith is a melody in the eternal song, through jubilees. The story of humanity becomes a reflection of the movement of the stars. It shows that the sun and moon don't just light up the world, they also mark the ages of souls. Their rise and fall are like birth and death, waking up and going to sleep. Angels even follow these patterns, going up and down in the order of God. People say that every good deed sends ripples through this rhythm, like a note that never fades, and every act of cruelty changes it, making the great song of creation shake. Jubilees talks about memory in a poetic way. It says that time is not a straight line but a living thing, and that the past is not gone but is still part of the present. Every jubilee, every cycle, brings the world closer to remembering. Creation itself wants to go back to the first light and the peace it once knew. People have lost the sense of sacred time as they wander around, counting their days instead of finding meaning in them. The angel told Moses, though, that to live right is to walk in divine time again. This means resting when the Creator rests, getting up when He calls, and listening for the hidden music that never stopped playing. In this secret Genesis, angels are not faraway beings, but friends of time. They keep the stars in line, protect the world's rhythm, and whisper reminders to those who still look up at the sky. In the highlands of Ethiopia, where the Book of Jubilees was written in the ancient language of Ge'ez, monks used to chant its words by the light of flickering lamps. Their voices rose like incense, not quickly or loudly, but in a way that seemed to follow the rhythm described in the text. They thought of these as living breath, not lost words, but the echo of God's first speech to the universe. It might seem like the stars were slowly moving in harmony. The moon was following its sacred path, and the earth was turning with unseen grace as they prayed quietly. If you listened carefully in that silence, you might still be able to hear it, the sound of the divine clock beating beyond human hours, the rhythm of creation. And that sound holds the message of Jubilees, that time is not a straight line, but a circle of light that always comes back to where it started. Every dawn reminds us of the first light, And every Sabbath reminds us of the rest that comes at the end of every age. The Book of Jubilees does not teach, but reminds us that life itself is a holy rhythm, that creation was never a mess, it was a dance, that every life and every breath is part of the same song that is always changing. Even though people may have forgotten the old calendar, heaven has not. Its music still plays, softly and patiently, bringing every heart back to the beat it was meant to keep. Baruch stood on the hill above Jerusalem as the sun began to set. The city that used to be golden was now in ruins. Its temple was silent, its streets were empty, and its songs were gone. The smoke still curled up like a memory that wouldn't die, telling of prayers that used to fill the air. The prophet's heart hurt with a weight that was too heavy to describe. He wasn't just watching a city fall. He was seeing a promise break, something holy break. Every broken wall and every fallen stone seemed to cry out, not in anger but in sadness. And Baruch, Jeremiah's scribe, carried that sadness like a scroll pressed to his chest, as if he were holding the pieces of a world that had been lost. He remembered when Jerusalem was full of faith. Priests would chant, kids would laugh in the courtyards, and merchants would shout blessings with every sale. But the people had turned their backs. They had lost sight of the heart of their Creator and were chasing false gods and empty promises. Even though the prophets told them to be careful, few did. Baruch had written the words himself, which were words of warning and pleading that Jeremiah had told him to write. But when the soldiers came and the flames rose, it was like no one had ever believed. The silence that came after was worse than any sound of war as he walked through the ruins. The sound of broken pottery crunching under his feet was like memories that were too fragile to hold on to. He whispered names to the wind, names of people who had once been with him and names of people who had disappeared. He couldn't leave, even though the city was gone. He stayed, grieving not just for the walls and stones, but also for the spirit that had once lived in them. The spirit of belief, the feeling of belonging, the spirit that connected heaven and earth. There were times when despair got the best of him. What could you hope for when the holy house was in ruins? How could someone rebuild when the promise seemed broken? But in the darkest silence, Baruch felt a small movement, a memory of something Jeremiah had said. Words that had seemed impossible at the time, but now felt like a lifeline. Jeremiah had said, "The days will come when the Lord will make a new covenant, not like the one written on stone, but one written on the heart." Baruch didn't get it then, but now that he was standing in the ruins, he could see. Maybe the destruction wasn't the end, but a painful but necessary change. He started writing again, not because there was anyone else to read it, but because writing felt like breathing. His scrolls turned into prayers, with lines of sadness and hope woven together. "Be brave," he wrote. "Even though you have fallen, the one who called you will not leave you. From your ashes, a new faith will rise." Each word was both a cry of grief and a promise. He cried as he wrote, but not just because he was sad. They were like water that softened the clay of his soul, getting it ready to be remade. Sometimes, when the nights grew cold, Baruch would sit where the temple once stood and watch the stars. He thought about whether the same stars had looked down on Abraham, when God promised him that his descendants would be as many as the stars. Maybe they saw this city grow and now see it fall, and yet the stars stayed the same, untouched, patient, and eternal. Baruch thought that faith might be like that. It could be buried, forgotten, or broken, but it would never go out. It waited to shine again somewhere under the dust. He could see the shapes of what could be rebuilt in the ruins. Maybe not the same city, but a new kind one built on mercy and memory instead of pride and ritual. He thought that one day the children would come back and the courtyards would be filled with laughter again. He thought about songs coming back to the streets, but this time they would be softer, more humble, and based on understanding. Hope was his quiet way of fighting despair. He knew that even if his generation never saw renewal, someone else would. That faith would spread like a spark through the ages, until it found something to light it again. Baruch often thought of Jeremiah, the man who told the truth to a people who didn't want to hear it, who had been thrown into pits, mocked and broken, but who never gave up. Baruch was both his scribe and his friend. He remembered how Jeremiah's eyes would fill with tears, even when he was warning them about judgment. Jeremiah had once told him, "The heart of a prophet is not to curse, but to grieve." So Baruch grieved, but not with anger. He grieved with love, the kind of love that sees beyond destruction to salvation. Baruch learnt that grief and faith could live together, like roots and soil when he was alone. He thought that faith had to die and then come back to life, that losing everything could take away the illusion and show the real heart of belief. The God who let the city fall was the same God who spoke to them at night to comfort them. Not far away, but close. Not mean, but improving. Baruch's sadness turned into prayer, and his sadness turned into strength in that quiet moment. Years later, people who traveled through the area talked about an old prophet who still lived among the ruins. He wrote by starlight and spoke softly about forgiveness and a promise that would never die. Some people said he had gone crazy because he had been sad for too long. Some people said that his words brought peace, as if heaven itself were resting on his shoulders. No matter what they believed, they always left with a strange stillness in their hearts, as if they had been touched by something holy. Maybe Baruch's real gift was not rebuilding stone walls, but helping people rebuild their faith inside. Baruch's last words were a whisper. The Lord has not forgotten his people. The wind carried those words through the broken gates and across the empty plains. And in time, those plains would bloom again. Not because the pain was forgotten, but because it had changed. Baruch's tears, which he had shed for a city that had been lost, became the seeds of new life. They soaked into the ground where Jerusalem had fallen, giving hope to generations yet to come. His story reminds every soul that faith does not end in the fire. It is reborn from its embers. Even when everything is gone, the heart can still find its way back home. Time seemed to move more slowly in a quiet stone monastery, hidden away in the Ethiopian highlands. The sun shone down on the rough mountains in a golden silence, touching the old walls where monks worked day and night to protect the holy. The steady light of candles flickered in the dark room inside. The air was thick with the smells of beeswax, ink, and incense that curled up like prayers made visible. This was more than just a place to write. It was a safe place for memories, where words could connect heaven and earth. The monks sat in rows with their legs crossed and wore white cotton robes that brushed the floor. In front of each of them was a sheet of parchment made from goatskin that had been stretched thin and smooth. The pale surface looked like it was waiting to be heard. The scribe would first bow his head, say a short prayer, and then lift the reed pen. The tip of the pen was shiny with black ink that was made from soot and gum and mixed by hand. The first stroke was always planned, and it took a long time to do. Each letter flowed from right to left, gracefully and sharply, its rhythm guided not by haste but by devotion. There were times when the only sounds were the soft scraping of a pen on parchment and the steady breathing of men who had died to be quiet. But then the chants started. They were slow, melodic, and old. They filled the hall like a river flowing through stone, and the sound bounced off the arched ceilings. The words were a mix of prayers, hymns, and Bible verses. Writing was never separate from worship for these monks. Every syllable written was a way to praise God, and every pause was a time to listen for God's breath. They said it was the work of time. The youngest monk, who was only 20, often wondered about the older monks. Their hands were wrinkled but steady, and their eyes were dim but full of purpose. He had heard that every book they copied held a part of their soul, that the ink, in a quiet way, remembered what they said. He thought about people doing the same thing before him as he traced the old Ge'ez script, which was the language of the holy books. People said that angels watched over scribes and guided their pens so that no mistakes would ruin the holy words. And so he wrote, slowly and with respect, each stroke a sign of faith. The mountain air made the ink dry too quickly at times. When that happened, the monk would gently blow on the parchment. The warm air would soften the fibers and let the ink flow again. That breath, mixed with the smoke from the candles, felt sacred. The walls around him were dark from years of this ritual. Every stain and shadow showed how dedicated he was. Sometimes you could hear the sound of pages turning or the soft thud of a wax seal being pressed onto a finished manuscript. The older scribes would whisper blessings over their finished pages and touch the text with their foreheads before putting it away. They knew that these books might one day go far beyond these mountains, carried by priests, hidden by travelers, and kept safe through war and fire. Each scroll and codex was a small eternity wrapped in leather and prayer. The monastery got even quieter when night fell. The chants got quieter and turned into low murmurs that mixed with the sound of wind blowing through cypress trees outside. The moonlight would shine through small windows, making dust that was floating around look like little stars. The monks kept writing in that stillness because they thought the word never slept. They copied psalms, histories, and old prophecies, like stories of angels coming down and good people being lifted up. They didn't care if they ever read what they wrote. Their goal was not to understand, but to keep it safe. The holy things should last. Abbotess Fay, an older monk, had been writing for more than 40 years. His hands shook a little now, but he wouldn't stop. He would often tell the younger kids, "We're not just writing words, we are writing the heartbeat of time." They listened closely, but only a few really understood what he meant. But as they worked next to him, they started to feel it. Writing was a way to connect to something that had no end. Every book was a vessel of light, and every letter was a thread that connected the living and the divine. Even the mistakes were beautiful. The monk wouldn't tear the parchment if a drop of ink fell where it shouldn't. Instead, he would turn the mark into a symbol or a flourish, turning a mistake into art. This was also a lesson that something that isn't perfect can still become holy if you are patient. The chanting started up again as dawn approached. It sounded like it came from the stones themselves as well as from people. The monks looked up from their work, and the soft light of the rising sun lit up their faces. The sky beyond the monastery shone like gold leaf, and for a moment the whole world seemed to be lit up. They carefully rolled up their finished parchments and tied them with red and blue threads. After that, they bowed their heads and were quiet. They took the scrolls one at a time to a small room with wooden shelves on the walls. There were hundreds of manuscripts there, each one hand-copied bound, and blessed. Some were wrapped in fine cloth to keep dust off of them, while others had faded ink and letters that had been half erased by time. But even the oldest and most fragile ones seemed to be alive and breathing. They held not only scripture, but also centuries of devotion, the sound of countless breaths and the beat of countless hearts. Life went on outside, with shepherds guiding their flocks, traders crossing mountain paths, and the world changing and moving. Inside the monastery, though, time moved at its own pace. It didn't move quickly. It didn't forget. The monks thought that the books would still be there long after their bodies were gone, carrying their prayers like rivers carry starlight. For them, this was forever, not a long period of time, but a single moment that was wide enough to hold everything holy. Writing, chanting, and breathing are all parts of the same act of worship. The youngest monk finally put down his pen and looked at the lines in front of him. The dark ink stood out against the pale parchment, and the words glowed softly in the candlelight. For the first time, he felt like he had touched something that would last forever. The bells started to ring slowly, solemnly, and beautifully from somewhere far away. The echoes rolled over the mountains, mixing with the soft sound of prayer that was still in the air. The monks got up together, and their robes made a soft sound as they moved. Their voices rose again, steady and clear. The candlelight flickered on their faces, and in that golden light, it looked like the walls were breathing with them. The monastery was still there, as it always had been, quiet, strong, and carved into the heart of the highlands. And inside its walls, the words kept coming, line by line, breath by breath, prayer by prayer, prayer by prayer, until even silence seemed to hum with the music of faith. They said that Giez was more than just a language. It was a living hymn that angels breathed into the world and that people who wanted to go to heaven remembered. When the sun came up in Ethiopia, the sound of Giez would rise like incense. The mist would roll down the mountain slopes, and bells would ring to call the faithful to prayer. The syllables shone through the still air, deep, resonant, and slow, like water flowing over stone. The rhythm of each word felt like it was older than memory, like the earth itself knew how to speak it before people did. Monks and priests stood barefoot inside the stone churches carved into rock, and their voices blended together in harmony. They didn't just speak Giez, they sang it. The words flowed like wings, with each vowel stretched out and each consonant kissed with breath. There were no sharp edges or hurry in the language. It stayed and shone. When they read the Bible, the words seemed to rise up from the floor and float up, glowing softly in the golden light of the candles. It was impossible not to feel that heaven was close by for those who listened. Kids who went to small monastic schools to learn. Giez often started by drawing the letters in sand or ash. The letters were beautiful, with curves, grace, and balance that looked like the steps of a slow dance. The students were told that every stroke had spiritual weight and that every symbol had layers of sound and meaning. The teacher would say, "Now you have learnt the music of creation," when a boy first learnt the alphabet. In reality, Giez felt more like remembering a song the soul had once known than learning a language. Those same students would spend years memorizing hymns, psalms, and old prayers as they got older. The rhythm of Giez changed their hearts, calmed their tempers, and taught them to listen with both their ears and their silence. The language was not meant to be used for arguing or debating. It was meant to lift, calm, and bring people together. Every word, whether it was a prayer or a prophecy, was said on purpose. The monks said that sound had power. If you said a syllable wrong, you lost a drop of light. The elders used to tell a story about how Enoch walked with God and went to heaven, where he heard angels speaking. When he came back to write down what he saw, his tongue burned with divine sound. That noise turned into jeers. Some people thought it was the first language, spoken before Babel broke up human languages. It wasn't limited by time or tribe. It was eternal, like light. This belief made people pray with a quiet respect, whether it was true or not. They whispered blessings in Ge'ez over bread, babies, and sick people because they thought those words could reach higher than any others. Abba Johans, an old priest, sat under a fig tree in an ancient monastery deep in the Tigray highlands and read verses to a group of young novices. His voice was thin because he was old, but it was steady. The words came out slowly, vibrating in his chest like the strings of a lyre. The boys closed their eyes and let the sounds wash over them. He said to them, "Don't just listen to what I say. Listen to what breath hides in the sound." Ge'ez means breath. He said that in their language, the word ruach meant both breath and spirit. Every time they breathed out, it was like a prayer. That truth became clear in the candlelit sanctuaries. When priests chanted the Bible, you could see their breath rise in the cool air and shine like silver in the light. The word was made visible through mist. The faithful thought that every breath they took joined the angels' song above. And when the service was over, there would be a heavy, sweet silence. People said that even the quiet in those churches spoke Ge'ez. People from faraway places, like Greece, Syria, and later Europe, who came to Ethiopia often wrote about how amazed they were to hear the old chants. They said they felt like they had stepped into a different world, one where time didn't move. It was like hearing the voice of the early earth, clear and unbroken. But the monks never did it to get praise. They sang to keep their promise to make music. In the monasteries, the written form of Ge'ez was just as holy. The scribes who wrote the language on parchment did so with the same respect as priests who offered incense. The letters were dark and purposeful, and they seemed to hum even when they were still. The black ink shone a little when the sun hit the pages, as if the script itself absorbed light. In some old books, gold dust was mixed with ink to make holy names like God, angel, and light shine. Readers would tilt the page a little and watch divine names flicker in gold, which reminded them that what they were holding was not just words but living light. Ge'ez was not a language used in the fields or the market. It was never used for trade or argument. It was used for prayer, poetry, and holy lessons, as well as for talking to God and listening to Him. When a monk got sick, the other monks came to his bedside and sang Ge'ez hymns. They thought that even if he was between life and death, he would still hear the sound because the soul never forgot it. They said that to die with those words around you was to go home and hear the same music that brought you into being. It's strange how some languages just won't go away. For more than 1,000 years, Ge'ez has not changed. Amharic, Tigrinya, and Oromo were all spoken languages that changed over time. But Ge'ez stayed the same, frozen in prayer. Ethiopians still use it for church services, and every morning their voices can be heard echoing through old churches. A lot of people don't fully understand what it means, but they don't have to. They can feel it. Just the rhythm can make something deep inside you ache, feel at peace, or remember. Every syllable seems to open a door between worlds. Ge'ez still lives in the space between humans and gods. It doesn't need to be translated because its sound conveys emotion more clearly than words could ever do. The priests' voices rise and fall like the wind blowing over hills when they chant the anaphora. The people who are listening sway slowly, with their eyes closed and their hearts still. Everything looks clear for a moment, even the walls, candles, and air. Language breaks down the line between heaven and earth. At dusk, when the world is quiet and a church bell rings in the distance, you can still hear the echoes of jeers rolling across the valleys. They come softly, like wings beating, and each sound carries hundreds of years of devotion. One might think that angels still walk the highlands at that time, singing the same hymns they taught people long ago. And if you listen closely, it sounds like the mountains are humming along, keeping the rhythm going forever. There are monasteries in the northern Ethiopian mountains that look like they haven't changed in hundreds of years. The clouds are low enough to touch the bell towers. Their walls are made of living rock. Their roofs are dark from years of rain, and their courtyards smell like incense and juniper. These aren't just regular places to worship. They're living libraries where books breathe and every page has the heartbeat of devotion. Monks have been watching over manuscripts that the rest of the world has long forgotten for more than 1,000 years. Behind their thick stone walls, they go by the name of the keepers. There is not a lot of noise in these monasteries. It hums softly, and you can hear the prayers of people who have come before you. When you walk through their small doors, your eyes get used to the soft light of candles. Shadows move over wooden shelves full of old scrolls bound in leather. The edges are frayed but still strong. The air smells like old paper and beeswax. In the morning light, dust motes float like little planets. It feels like everything, even the walls, remembers every word that has ever been spoken inside them. In this quiet place, the monks move slowly. As they walk, their white robes brush against the stone floor. Some people have lived here their whole lives, never leaving the mountain for decades. Their faces look like old pages, and their eyes are calm and steady. They don't say much, but their silence says a lot. For them, protecting these books is not a job. It is a promise and a way to worship. The writings they protect, like Enoch, Jubilees, Maccabean, and many others, are more than just history. They are living voices that carry the breath of angels, prophets, and scribes. A monk unlocks a wooden chest bound with iron. Every morning before the first light hits the tops of the mountains, there are manuscripts inside that are older than most countries. The covers are thick with oil from hands that have turned the pages for hundreds of years. The ink, which is made from soot and resin, is still black against the yellowed parchment. Some pages have very faint fingerprints from the people who wrote them a long time ago. Touching a page like this is like touching time itself. The monk lifts each book carefully, as if it were a newborn baby. Then, with a flickering candle, he starts to read softly, not out loud but in a whisper that only heaven can hear. These manuscripts were not meant to last. History tried to get rid of them. Empires came and went. Fires burned down libraries, and councils said some words were holy and others were not. But the stories lived on here, in the quiet highlands. The monks knew that light doesn't always shine where you can see it. It has to be hidden sometimes to stay safe. When soldiers came, they buried copies under floors, sealed scrolls in clay jars, and took others deep into caves. A lot of them never came back. Their bones are somewhere in the hills, but their faith kept the word alive. Abbot Tisfe was a monk who lived in the 15th century, according to one story. When invaders came to his monastery, he took the most important books, wrapped them in goatskin, and ran away to the mountains. He walked through rain and fog for days, not sleeping until he found a cave high enough to hide them. He died there, holding the bundle close to his chest. Explorers found the cave again hundreds of years later. The scrolls were dry and in good shape. There were faint handprints on the walls, his pressed into the rock, as if he had blessed the cave with his last breath. There were also monks who copied the same texts over and over, knowing that if one burned, another would live. They wrote each word by hand and drew each letter with care. They made new pigment from soot and honey when the ink ran out. When the parchment ripped, they sewed it back together with thin thread. They worked in silence, listening to the sound of quills scratching on vellum. It was a soft, rain-like sound. The words of prophets like Enoch and Isaiah lived on long after they were forgotten in other places, because they were patient. Being a keeper is not a big deal. It is marked by small rituals, like lighting lamps, turning pages, and sweeping dust. But each act shows a lot of love. The abbot takes the new monk to the library and says, "You are now the guardian of voices." The young monk bows and touches his forehead to the floor. From then on, the books he protects are a part of his life. He doesn't eat much, sleep much, or do much else. At night, he copies faded lines by candlelight. The wind howls through the mountain passes outside, but his heart is steady inside. Visitors who make it to these monasteries, which can take hours of climbing steep paths, are greeted with quiet smiles. A few monks will hold up a manuscript to the light and show it to them. The visitors are amazed by the old letters written in G. The black ink is still sharp, and the pages smell like smoke and prayer. The monks don't often explain what they write. They just say, "These are the words of our fathers," and then they carefully close the book, as if they were putting a child to sleep. During some festivals, the manuscripts are carried in a procession. The crowd sings and drums echo through the valleys as they are lifted high. They are wrapped in silk cloths with gold embroidery. People bow as the books go by, not to worship the parchment, but to honor the truth inside them, the truth that their ancestors refused to let die. After the procession is over, the books go back to their stone homes, where they will stay until the next holy day. Even now, when cameras and digital archives have come to Ethiopia, many monasteries still keep their oldest manuscripts hidden. They say that the light of the modern world is too bright for such fragile treasures. Some keepers have memorized whole books and recite them in the dark to keep the words from fading. This way, they make sure that knowledge is never lost, not even to time. Their way of life is quietly heroic. There are no armies to protect them, and they don't get famous for their work. But because of these quiet men, the words of Enoch, the songs of Maccabean, the visions of Isaiah, and the cries of Baruch are still alive today. They have kept their faith through hundreds of years of silence. They stayed even when storms ripped roofs off, famine emptied villages, and kingdoms fell apart. They fixed the bindings, patched the walls, and said their prayers over each page that was fixed. A monk opens a window facing east in the soft light of dawn. When mist wraps around the bell towers, the first ray of sunlight hits the old pages, making the gold ink look like fire. The birds start to sing, and the outside world wakes up. But inside, the keepers keep working, writing eternity one line at a time, without rushing or being seen. And even though not many people know their names, the earth still turns a little slower around those sacred mountains, as if to honor the quiet guardians who kept the truth alive when the world chose to forget. in the highlands. There are nights when the air feels alive. The stars over Ethiopia look like open eyes, and the wind blows through the juniper trees like it's carrying secrets from another world. People say that heaven comes closer to earth on nights like these, not in loud noises or bright lights, but in the soft words of dreams. Ethiopian mystics thought that when words were forbidden and scrolls were sealed, heaven spoke in other ways, like through sleep and visions that fell like soft rain on the soul. Dreams were not seen as illusions in the quiet of the monasteries. People thought of them as sacred meetings, both fragile and holy. The monks would get up before dawn, after long nights of prayer, and their faces would glow softly in the candlelight. Some people had dreams about rivers flowing up, angels with wings of fire, and cities of crystal rising from clouds. They would write down what they remembered in the margins of parchment, not as doctrine, but as a memory of something too big for real life to hold. For them, dreaming wasn't a way to get away from the world. It was a way to see it the way God wanted it to be. There is a story about a mystic named Abba Johannes, who lived deep in the Semian mountains. He lived alone for years, hardly speaking, and spent his days praying and fasting. He felt the weight of the world lift from him one night when the sun went down behind the mountains. That night, he dreamed of a golden staircase that went up into the fog. There was an angel on each step, singing in a language that was older than time. When he woke up, his beard was wet with tears. He said that the angels had spoken without words. Their voices were made of light, and the song had shown him how to make things. He never said he understood it completely. He only said he had seen something holy that couldn't be written down. People in his village came to him for help. They came with sick kids, broken hearts, and questions that felt like stones on their minds. He would close his eyes, listen, and speak softly. It wasn't his own thoughts that he was speaking, but the dreams that were still alive in him. When people asked him how he knew what to say, he smiled and said, "Because I listen while I sleep." His words were as gentle as the words in the scriptures of Enoch, where visions of heaven flow like rivers through the stars. A lot of these mystics thought that dreams weren't just random flashes of the mind, but bridges strings that connected the human soul to the divine. Enoch walked among the watchers in ancient texts and saw how the universe was built. Many years later, Ethiopian dreamers said they saw the same things, the wheels of heaven turning, the rivers of light, and the stars that moved as if they were following music. They said that the heavens were not far away, but layered, with worlds inside of worlds, each one brighter than the last. They said, when heaven can't speak in words, it speaks in visions when asked where these pictures came from. Not only the monks, but also the shepherds and villagers who lived under those same stars thought dreams were sacred. After praying, farmers would lie down in the fields with their eyes closed, feeling the sun's warmth and waiting for signs. Women said that their ancestors would come to them in their sleep and offer comfort or warnings before storms. Children dreamed of angels who taught them new psalms. It was hard to tell the difference between sleep and revelation, like the edge of dawn. Life itself seemed to hum with an unseen presence, as if heaven were just out of reach. People shared their dreams in the quiet mountain villages at dawn. A man would wake up and tell his wife that he saw a river of fire in the sky. She would nod seriously and light incense because she knew that dreams like this had meaning. A dream could sometimes tell you about a trip, a death, or a miracle. Other times, it was just a message of peace, a vision of light that reminded them that God was still with them. People thought that dreams were the last way for heaven and earth to talk to each other when words failed and prophets stopped speaking. Mystics often likened dreams to water. They take on the shape of whatever holds them but stay pure. A scholar in his monastery or a child sleeping under a woven blanket could have a dream. It didn't care if you were smart or dumb, strong or weak. God gave dreams to people, and they shouldn't be earned but received. The Book of Jubilees even talked about heavenly tablets that were shown in sleep. They were symbols written in fire that only people, whose hearts were quiet enough to hear the whisper behind them, could see. An old story tells of a nun named Wubit who dreamed every night of writing a book out of light. Every letter she drew lit up the dark with a soft white and gold glow. A voice told her it holds the words that were never spoken when she asked what the book was about. For years, she tried to write down what she had seen, but no ink could do it. She prayed instead, letting the memory stay quiet. The other sisters said that when she died, her cell was filled with a strange light, as if the unwritten book had finally opened in another world. In Ethiopia, these kinds of stories weren't rare. For hundreds of years, monks and nuns wrote down dreams that were like those in ancient texts, like visions of the tree of life, stars tied together by chains, and thrones above the clouds. Some dreams were meant to warn me, while others were meant to comfort me. People said that when invaders destroyed churches, the saints would come to the monks in their dreams and tell them where to hide their books. People dreamed that angels were pouring golden rain from bowls when there was a drought, and when despair spread, a dream might show just one thing, a candle that wouldn't go out. That would be enough to give someone hope for another season. Mystics said that dreams weren't just messages. They were also meetings. They thought that the soul could walk through the halls of heaven if it was free from the noise of the body. In that stillness, the lines between time and space disappeared. The dead spoke, angels sang, and the divine presence came closer in forms that the dreamer could handle seeing. People who had these kinds of visions often came back different. They talked more softly, smiled more easily, and seemed to have a peace that couldn't be shaken. They didn't call the feeling fear or wonder. They called it rest in their writing. One monk said, it was like lying in the heart of a song, and every note was love. They didn't think of revelation as thunder or a commandment. Instead, they thought of it as a kind of quiet music that played between worlds. The spirit listened while the body slept, and sometimes, while they were listening, heaven itself spoke. The monks kept their dreams safe, just like they kept their books safe. When invaders burned their libraries, they whispered the stories they had seen in visions so that they would never die. They dreamed of rain when there was a famine. They dreamed of light when their faith wavered. They dreamed that God was still talking to them, softly and endlessly, through the veil of sleep when the land was silent. The mountains of Ethiopia are still there, old and still, holding not only hidden manuscripts, but also the memories of those who dreamed the heavens open. Even now, on quiet nights when the stars are bright and the wind sighs through the valleys, you might hear it, the same holy whisper, the sound of heaven speaking in dreams. The highlands are quiet at night, and the stone monasteries are quiet too. But inside those walls, a soft, old, and alive hum starts. It doesn't sound like people talking. Instead, it sounds like something older, a melody that feels like it's woven into the bones of the earth. The Ethiopian hymns have been around for hundreds of years and float like incense into the dark. No parchment holds them, and no scribe made them. They live in the breath of those who believe and in the trembling lips of monks who have sung them since faith began. These are the hymns that will never die. They are voices that echo through time, following the same path as the wind that once blew through the deserts of prophets. Every note is a memory. Each chant connects the dust to the divine. The monks' chants rise with them when they get up before dawn. They vibrate against the high ceilings and touch the faint light that comes in through small windows. The words are in Ge'ez, an ancient language that doesn't have a home except in the heart of prayer. It might sound like a song from another world to someone who isn't from there. In those syllables, the listener hears the sound of time passing. The rhythm sways like wings, and the breaks are full of awe. The chants don't rush to find meaning. They stay there, letting silence and sound breathe together. The air is thick, with smoke and beeswax in a remote monastery where candles flicker against stone walls. The priests start to sing. Their voices blend together in a way that isn't perfect but is beautiful. They are rough and shaky, but they are strong with devotion. Some are young, some are old, and their tones blend together until the generations fade away. The song is about creation and angels singing before stars were born. It also carries sadness, the weight of being away from home, the memory of floods, and the cries of prophets who saw their people fall. But underneath it all, there is peace, like the calm that comes after rain. The hymns don't ask you to believe in anything. They just remind your soul of what it already knows, that something holy lasts beyond the rise and fall of empires. People used to sing the hymns outside, on mountains where their voices echoed across valleys. No instruments or orchestras, just wind and breath. The people thought that the angels themselves joined in, singing along with sounds that could not be heard. When a priest starts the old chants, he is not performing. He is joining a chorus that started before him and will continue long after he is gone. People say that these songs came from visions and that holy men heard them in their dreams and brought them back when they woke up. In that way, they are not things that people made up, but gifts from God that have been kept alive through devotion instead of ink. The songs are hard to sing, but they come from the heart. There are no written instructions or notes. People learn the rhythm by copying it from one voice to another. A beginner listens for months before they join in. His mentor says, "Don't sing with your mouth, sing with your soul." So he listens to the wind between the trees, the rustle of parchment, and the breath of silence until he can feel the music instead of thinking about it. When he finally sings, it seems like the hymn has always been inside him, just waiting to be remembered. There is more than praise in these chants. They tell a story. The songs stayed the same even when conquerors came. Temples were burned, and books were lost to fire or theft. They couldn't be taken. Monks kept them in their hearts and whispered them while they were in exile. They hummed them while they worked in the fields or copied holy texts. They brought back more than just songs when they came back. They brought back proof that the faith had survived through sound. The hymns became the voice of strength and hope that won't go away. The voices come back in the stillness of the night. This time, an older person is in charge. His voice is deep and rough, like a cedar tree. For 40 years, he has sung this hymn every night. His fingers move in time, drawing shapes in the air that can't be seen. The younger monks are behind him, their eyes half closed and their breathing steady. When they play together, they make a sound that is so full that it feels like you could touch it. The chant fills the room, goes through the narrow doorways, and spills out into the cold air outside, where it mixes with the stars. In the quiet between notes, it feels like heaven is listening. There are hymns for dawn and hymns for morning, hymns for harvest and hymns for rain. Some tell stories, like those of Abraham's faith, Moses' bravery, and Mary's light. Some people don't say anything at all. They just make sounds like hums, sighs, and vibrations that are only meant for God. The monks say that those are the purest because true worship starts when language ends. These nameless sounds make the divine feel closer, like the warmth of a candle flame on your skin. People from faraway places come to hear the chants, thinking they'll hear music, but they leave with tears in their eyes. They can't say why. Maybe it's the rhythm of the breath, the feeling of being timeless, or the idea that the sound comes from the singers, but through them. The hymns don't make you laugh. They wake you up. They bring back memories of the first time someone felt awe, like standing under a huge sky or watching light break through clouds. The monks say that every chant has a twin in heaven, and that an angel answers every note sung on earth. They don't want applause or to be remembered when they sing. They want resonance. And that's why these hymns will never die. They don't belong to just one generation or one country. They are part of the eternal act of remembering, which is remembering that sound was the first thing to be made. The Bible starts with the words, "And God said." The hymns go on to say that they are the voice of that first word, which keeps coming back. The monks bow their heads as the last notes fade away. The stars blink in approval as the night goes back to its quiet rhythm. But there is still something there, a hum in the walls, a warmth in the air, as if the song itself won't go away. A different monastery starts to chant in the distance, and so the chain goes on, from mountain to mountain, voice to voice, and age to age. Faith does not traverse on paper or stone, but through sound. And somewhere in that soft, old, unbroken melody, God still speaks. Before the first prayer rises in the quiet light of dawn, there is a book on a wooden table. Its cover is worn smooth from hundreds of years of hands that trembled with reverence. This book is not like any other. When light hits its pages, they seem to remember the candles that used to burn next to them. There are miracles inside it, not just the ones that are written about, but the miracle of its very existence. Every line and brushstroke is so full of love that even time has stopped to keep it safe. The monks who made it didn't think of themselves as artists, they thought of themselves as witnesses, channels through which the divine could bring color and shape to the world we can see. The Book of Miracles is more than just words on a page. It's a prayer that lives. Every page was made with awe and patience. The parchment was made from animal skin and was made with fasting and prayer. They mixed the ink with ash and honey, and they laid down the gold, yes, real gold, with shaky hands. The monk who painted didn't just paint. He also thought about things. He thought that every stroke had to show how pure his heart was. He would say a prayer before he started, "Let my hand not wander from truth." The colors had meaning, deep. Blue for the heavens, crimson for divine love, and gold for the eternal light that knows no shadow. The scriptorium was quiet, but there was music in the air. The sound of quills scratching and the steady breathing of monks as they thought. Every move was planned like a gift. It could take years or even decades to make a manuscript like this. When a monk got too old to finish his work, another monk took over and humbly combined his devotion with the first monk's style. The outcome was not merely a collaboration, but a continuation, one soul fulfilling the prayer of another. That's why each Book of Miracles feels real. It contains generations of hope and desire. The pages open up like dreams. One shows angels coming down from mountains with wings that are brushed with gold and eyes that are calm like dawn. Another shows seas parting at God's command, with waves painted in layers of translucent blues that look like living water when the light hits them. There are flames that don't burn, stars that sing, and hands that reach out in mercy. Every picture tells a story, but it does so without words. The person watching feels instead of reading. When you look into the eyes of a painted saint, you feel like the image sees you too, and your own reflection softens. The book doesn't show a miracle. It shows how something that has always been hidden is now visible. A monk is kneeling in one corner of a monastery in front of a page that isn't quite done. His brush is thin, his eyesight is getting worse, but his heart is steady. The Transfiguration shows Christ dressed in bright light in front of him. He dips his brush into gold, not to capture its beauty, but to honor it. His hand shakes a little, but he keeps going. He is not painting light, he is becoming it. Every stroke is a confession, a way to talk to God without saying anything. He presses his forehead to the parchment and whispers, "May this shine in hearts, not eyes." Someone who has never prayed in Ge'ez and may not even know the artist's name will open that same page many centuries later. But when the light hits the gold, something old stirs a feeling of stillness, respect, and smallness in front of something big. That is how miracles stay alive. Not by explaining, but by being there. The book serves as a temporal bridge, eliminating the necessity for translation of faith. Some people think that visions inspired the Book of Miracles. They say that monks saw flashes of divine light and images forming in front of their closed eyes, telling them to paint what cannot be spoken. The brightness of their art seems to back it up. The way the light hits the robes or the softness of an angel's gaze, these are not guesses. They are memories of something holy seen in silence. Every line has a sense of humility, as if the artists knew. They were on the edge of something mysterious and never tried to take it. The margins also have their own stories to tell. Little figures are hiding among the vines, birds are sitting on the letters, and flowers are curling round the verses. These weren't just decorations. The monks thought that beauty was a way to praise God, and that decorating the Word of God was a way to love it more. Every little thing, even the ones that the average reader can't see, was a prayer made visible. A small tear of gold leaf next to the word mercy, or a faint thumbprint in the corner, are examples of how the divine and human were always close to each other. These pages look like they are glowing from the inside when the candlelight hits them. The colors change in small ways, like a sunset that is alive. The gold lights don't reflect light, they let it in. People forget that this beauty was made by people when they see it. It seems like it will last forever, untouched by the passage of time. The same hymn that used to fill the scriptorium seems to hum again in the silence, as if the pages remember the prayers that were said over them. People who wrote these books didn't want to be recognized. The monks still didn't have names. They signed their work with humility, sometimes with just one line, written by the least of God's servants. But the fact that they are anonymous only makes the art stronger. It reminds us that real creation doesn't want to be seen. It wants to show. The miracle is not the painter, but the spirit that flows through him. The air feels different when you turn the pages of a manuscript like this, almost holy. The book seems to pray with you, whispering through the ink and paper. The stories about prophets, angels, and resurrection are not just told again. They are felt again. Every detail draws the heart closer to silence, where understanding fades and only awe remains. There is a story that the monks tell about how, when a manuscript was done, the heavens would open for a short time and a single ray of light would fall on the finished page. A lot of people said they saw it, a golden glow that flickered like breath, but no one could prove it. It could have been a figment of my imagination. Or maybe it was the divine stopping to recognize the love that went into making things. Even now, when someone stands in front of one of these illuminated books in a museum or a secret monastery, the same quiet miracle happens. The colors say something without making a sound, and the pictures draw the eye inward. You can still feel the heartbeat of faith beneath the gold and ink. It is not just a book of miracles. It is the miracle itself. It shows that when you create something with love and respect, it becomes prayer. The pages don't just tell stories of wonder. They are the wonder. They show that light never goes out once it is given. Oxum is an old city in the highlands of northern Ethiopia, where the air gets thin and the hills shine gold in the sun. The stones tell stories. There are secrets in its silence. Under that silence, the faithful whisper of something divines, something that is not in heaven but on earth. People say that the Ark of the Covenant, the holy box that used to hold the tablets of God's law, has never been lost. It sleeps in Ethiopia, safe in the middle of a small chapel next to the old church of St. Mary of Zion. No one has seen it, and maybe no one ever will, but the story is still told with such respect that it feels more like a memory than a legend. People in Oxum don't talk about the Ark as an old thing. They talk about it as something that is still alive. To them, it's not an object, but a heartbeat. They say that when night falls and the stars scatter above the mountains, a soft hum comes from the chapel, like a song that is too holy for people to hear. According to old stories, the Ark's journey started in Jerusalem, the city of kings and prophets. There, in the Temple of Solomon, it rested, shining and untouchable. But when the world became restless and people forgot how to keep holy things holy, it was said that it was taken away to be kept safe. The Kebra Nagast, Ethiopia's royal history, tells the story of how Mentalik I, the Queen of Sheba's son and Solomon's bloodline, brought the Ark to Ethiopia with God's help. It didn't come as theft. It came as fate. It says that the light of Zion found a new home in the mountains of Africa. The Ark is not on display in Axum. It isn't shown off. It is not touched. A single monk guards it, a man chosen to live alone and devote himself to it for the rest of his life. He leaves the world behind the day he is hired. Only God knows his name. He never leaves the holy enclosure again. People can only see him from a distance, his shadow against a stone wall of the chapel, moving slowly through the courtyard at dawn or dusk. He doesn't have to show or explain the Ark. His job is to pray and keep it safe. Some say that the monk who guards the Ark ages quickly, as if the Ark's light is too bright for a mortal to handle. Some people say that he doesn't look scared. He looks peaceful, as if he is always in the presence of something holy. When a guardian dies, the monks choose someone else to take his place based on signs that only they can see. There is no ceremony for the change. The keys are given in silence, and the new guardian enters the room, disappearing from the world outside its walls. The chapel itself is simple, it's small, square, and has been around for hundreds of years. But the air around it feels heavy, almost electric, as if the ground remembers what it protects. Some pilgrims kneel and some stand still beyond the fence. They can't see the Ark, but they can feel it. Mothers bring their kids, old people bring their prayers, and young people bring questions that can't be answered. The monks tell them softly, you don't have to see it to know it's there. After all, faith doesn't depend on what you see at night. The guardian sits in front of the sanctuary's veil, his candle flickering like a star that is about to fall. His voice is slow and steady as he chants in Ge'ez, the old language of prayer. People say that the prayers, which have been going on for hundreds of years, are absorbed by the walls until the stones start to hum. People say they can hear it some nights when the wind blows through the fig trees and the stars line up. It sounds like a soft, melodic resonance coming from the chapel, like the echo of creation's first song. There are people from all over the world, including scholars, seekers, journalists, and skeptics, who have come to see the Ark, but they all leave with the same result: no sight, no proof, and only silence. But in that silence, many people find something they didn't expect, a deep stillness that feels like respect. Some come back changed, with less doubt and a presence they can't name that moves their hearts. In Oxum, you don't have to prove your beliefs. You just feel them. There are stories about the Ark's power. People say that people with bad hearts can't get close to it, and that those who do get too close get sick or pass out. But it brings peace to those who come with a humble heart. A long time ago, there was a drought, and the people of Oxum prayed outside the chapel. They didn't eat or drink for 7 days. On the 8th day, it rained heavily, soaking the ground. They said it was the Ark's mercy that made heaven remember its promise. Another story tells of people who tried to take the Ark from its owners. As they got closer to Axum, thunder split the sky, even though there was no storm. The ground shook, and the soldiers ran away, saying they saw fire rise from the chapel like a wall. These stories stay in the memory of the land, whether they are true or not. They are not told to show power, but to teach all that some things can't be conquered, reasoned with, or owned. The Ark's mystery is a part of Ethiopia's very being. Every church has a tablet, which is a copy of the original that is kept in the sanctuary. This is a sign of the covenant between God and his people. During festivals, priests carry the tablets on their heads under colorful umbrellas, making them look like a river of light as they move through the streets. The people sing hymns that echo through time and valleys, and the drums beat softly. They believe that each tablet is a reflection of the one true Ark in Oxum, which is hidden but still alive. Like a heartbeat under layers of history, the Ark still speaks, but not with words or revelations. It speaks through faith that won't go away. The guardian monk is still not seen, his prayers are still not written down, and his life is still not seen by the world. But his presence keeps the devotion of a whole country in check. The chapel in Oxum has stayed the same, even as empires have come and gone and kingdoms have burned and rebuilt. It has a stone heart that beats quietly under heaven's gaze. Sometimes, when the moonlight shines on the old church walls in the quietest hours of the night, you might picture the Ark glowing softly behind its veil knot as a thing made of gold and wood, but as pure light that has no limits and will last forever. It might not look like the chest that used to go through deserts and battles anymore. It may have changed into something else, a sign of faith's strength and the promise that God is always there. People in Oxum never ask for proof. They don't need it. Their faith has become a part of their daily lives, as natural as the sound of morning bells. When pilgrims leave, they take with them a quiet peace and the feeling that they have been close to mystery, the kind that asks for nothing but gives everything. In the end, the Ark's story isn't about finding or owning something. It's about loyalty, patience, and the holy bond between heaven and those who keep its secrets safe under the Ethiopian sky, in Ethiopia's quiet valleys, where rivers flow like silver threads between mountains. Stories still pass from elder to child, like sacred embers that have been kept alive for hundreds of years. These are not stories that can be found in printed Bibles or in the catalogue of any library. They are older than ink and even older than parchment. They are the spoken breath of prophets whose names were never written down and whose words live on only in the shaky tones of memory. These prophets were not quiet. They became part of the people, woven into their prayers, songs, and speech. People used to hunt for written words. People burned scrolls, erased names, and said that voices were not fit to be heard in churches. But prophecy doesn't go away when parchment burns. It moves like wind through leaves, without being seen but deeply felt. It moves in whispers, dreams, and chants under the stars. When the world got too loud for holy truth, the prophet's words found new homes in the hearts of the faithful. A mother might hum a part of an old blessing while she grinds grain in the early morning. A shepherd might say a prayer that his grandfather said came from a man who saw angels walking on the earth. People don't remember these oral prophecies exactly, but they do remember them with love. Their shape changes over time, like river stones that have been worn smooth, but their essence stays the same. One generation forgets a saying, and the next adds a vision. The spirit of prophecy is still alive in the exchange. It's not stuck in doctrine. It's alive, growing, and finding new life in each retelling. It wasn't scrolls that the people needed to remember that heaven had once spoken. They just needed faith and the desire to keep the memory alive after evening prayers. Elders would gather around fires in small mountain villages. The flames would flicker against stone walls that had been darkened by smoke for hundreds of years. There, the stories would slowly unfold, told in soft, rhythmic voices. They told stories of prophets who had seen light fall on rivers and talked to angels who were pretending to be travelers. They talked about visions in which mountains moved like people, bowing down in front of God, and even though no one wrote those words down, they were written on the hearts of everyone who heard them. Some prophecies were only a line or two long, but they held a lot of meaning. When the earth forgets its song, one elder would say, the stars will sing again. Others talked about peace and unity, saying that nations would come together not because of laws, but because of kindness. Some were darker, warning against pride and forgetting the old ways. But even in their warnings, there was kindness. It was a reminder that divine truth never left humanity. It waited for them to come back. When missionaries and scholars came in later centuries with their printed Bibles and theological frameworks, they were confused by these local prophecies. They wanted to know where they came from, who first said them, and why they weren't written down. When asked, the elders would only smile and say, "The mountain keeps its own records." They meant that the land remembers every hill, stream, and stone holds echoes of words spoken in faith. For them, the world itself is a living book, and maybe that's why prophecy never seemed far away in Ethiopia. It wasn't the end of the story. It was still going on. The divine voice didn't stop after the last book of the canon was written. It kept going through the years, showing up as intuition, in dreams, and in whispers during quiet times. Monks in monasteries would write down visions they had while fasting. These could be short flashes of light from heaven, a word from an unseen messenger, or a symbol drawn in their minds. People didn't say these visions were new revelations. Instead, they were honored as reminders that heaven still speaks in quiet ways. There are stories of villagers who would have dreams that told them where to dig a well or when to plant their seeds during times of drought. A lot of the time, the advice was simple, but the timing was amazing. They would say, "A prophet spoke," even though no prophet was there. They thought that prophecy wasn't just for a select few, but for anyone who was humble enough to listen. It could come to a child while she sleeps, a farmer while he works, or a monk while he prays. It wasn't about status. It was about being there, being able to hear beyond sound and feel truth when words aren't there. People used the GS word nebiat, which means prophets, with both respect and closeness. It meant not only those who predicted the future, but also those who felt close to God. Some of these nameless seers lived in caves, while others traveled from village to village with only a staff and a prayer. People would feed them, listen to them, and then, after they left, they would sing their words over and over again until they became songs. As time went on, those songs became part of the culture, passed down from generation to generation until no one remembered where they came from. The oral tradition kept something alive that written text couldn't: the warmth of the human voice, the rhythm of emotion, and the immediacy of spirit. When someone read a prophecy out loud, the way it sounded was just as important as the message itself. The pauses, the breath, and the trembling conviction behind each word were all important. People who heard those sounds felt something sacred stirring inside them, as if they were hearing the heartbeat of God. People in the highlands often tell the story of a blind old man who could recite dozens of old sayings. He would sit by the gate of the monastery and talk as if he were talking to someone who wasn't there. When people asked him how he remembered so much, he would smile and say, "I don't remember. The voice remembers me." It was a beautiful truth. Prophecy wasn't something that memory kept alive. It was a living presence that remembered those who were open to it. Even now, those lost prophets live on in hymns, blessings, and the silent faith of people who get up early to pray. In far-off places, priests still teach young novices bits of sayings that are thought to come from prophets whose writings are no longer available. Some academics say they are just stories, but some people who are really paying attention can hear something old in them, a tone, a rhythm, a depth that feels older than words. When you walk through those old places and hear a shepherd softly singing to his sheep, or a woman whispering a prayer as she lights her lamp, it's easy to think that prophecy is still in the air, not as thunder or a revelation, but as a husher reminder that truth doesn't have to shout. It lives on in whispers, gut feelings, dreams, and the heart's quiet pull towards what is right. The Ethiopians say that the spirit of prophecy was never meant to end. It is not limited to scrolls or canons. There is always a conversation going on between heaven and earth. It just got softer so that only people who listen with love can hear it. Some truths are not found in books, but in the spaces between words, the breath before prayer, and the silence that comes after faith. And even though time may erase the names of the prophets, their words will always be there, like seeds that have spread across the ages and are still taking root in hearts that are open enough to remember. In Ethiopia, time was never just a way to count the days that went by. It was a sacred, breathing, and endless rhythm. The calendar wasn't made just by the rules of astronomy. It was also made by love and the pulse of creation itself. Every sunrise was a line of a song, every moon was a prayer, and the year went by like a song written by hands we couldn't see. People said that heaven had its own clock, and the Ethiopian sages were able to hear it and repeat it on earth. They didn't count time. They made it holy by finding order in its turning that connected angels to people and dawn to eternity. Asterisk, they didn't talk about creation as a single event, but as a circle that keeps going. In the quiet before the first light, the eternal Word made the universe. From then on, all time was holy. Their calendar didn't start with kings or wars. It started with the beginning of the world. The days were based on divine actions, like making light, making man, and giving rest. Their weeks were full of meaning, their months were like stories, and their years were full of memories. Every day felt like a holy breath, as if time itself was praying all the time. The Ethiopian calendar is older than the Gregorian calendar that most of the world uses, but it still goes its own way. It moves more slowly, taking 13 months instead of 12, and each one is carefully balanced by the stars. Pagum, the 13th month, has only 5 or 6 days, but people say that these are the days that are closest to heaven. The world seems to stop for a moment, like a soul between two heartbeats. Monks rise before dawn in those days to chant in candlelight, their voices soft as wings. Farmers watch the seasons change and feel the Creator's breath in the air. Every holy day reminds us of where we came from. Sabbath is not just a day of rest. It is also a day of reunion when creation comes back to its Creator. The rise and fall of cosmic tides are reflected in feasts and fasts. Time moves differently in the monasteries high up on the hills of Lalibela. Not to call people to duty, but to show devotion, bells ring. Not the sun, but prayer tells the time. The monks read from very old scrolls that have verses, hymns, and memories of angels who guard the gates of time on each holy day. They think that living in harmony with this calendar means living in the rhythm of creation itself. There are stories about hermits who spent their whole lives studying the stars to learn about divine time. They said that when the calendars of heaven and earth lined up, miracles happened. When there was a drought, it rained. When there was darkness, it came back. And when there was sadness, it went away. The idea was simple but deep, that creation itself went through cycles of sin and forgiveness. It looked like the end, but it was just the start of something new. In the highlands of Ethiopia, where mountains stand like silent witnesses to eternity, the air is so still that you can almost feel time slowing down. The sky is still the same golden color it was thousands of years ago. Shepherds still count the days by the moon's phases, and mothers still hum old songs to celebrate festivals that are older than memory. The rhythm of life is not fast but slow, as if the earth is trying not to disturb the sacred measure. They don't see the passing of a day as a loss. Instead, they see it as a gifter, new turn in the circle that began when God said, "Let there be light." The old scribes said that even angels move in patterns of holy time. They thought that each angel watched over a year, a season, or a gate. The Book of Jubilees talked about heavenly weeks, which were 7-year periods that showed God's plan. The Ethiopians believed that the world's fate also changed at certain times. Prophets wouldn't talk until the right time. Blessings came when people were ready. And even though men could rush through life, heaven never did. Everything holy waited for its time. The rains that came after months of heat were not just weather, they were a sign from God. When the stars came back in the quiet winter sky, it was the Creator's whisper to his children that time is not for kings or clocks, but for love. This rhythm was true for even the smallest things, like lighting a candle, sharing bread, or forgiving someone. The people showed the harmony of creation in their quiet, everyday faith. The world today moves faster. Moments are rushed and seconds are split. But the bells in Ethiopia's monasteries still ring slowly. Their echoes travel over the stone walls, across valleys and rivers, and into the hearts of those who hear them. It's like they remind everyone that time isn't something to be conquered. It's something to be understood. If you look at each hour with gratitude, it is sacred. Every day is a new beginning. Every night, a peaceful return to the eternal. Some people say that you can hear the rhythm of divine time. When you really listen and the noise goes away and the silence fills the air. It sounds like a heartbeat, old and steady, the pulse of life moving through everything that is alive. The Ethiopian monks know it well and pray with it. Their chants rise and fall like breathing, perfectly in time with the rhythm that holds heaven and earth together but can't be seen. And so, in this old way of thinking about time, there is a lesson for everyone who feels lost in the modern world. Time is not your enemy. It is your teacher. It is not getting away. It is getting closer. Every moment gives you a chance to go back to peace, stillness, or memory. The calendar of creation keeps turning, just like it always has. It invites tired people to rest in its rhythm and see that eternity has never left. It lives quietly in the soft flow of time. People say that some books were not written by men. Angels first whispered them, and their words fell like soft rain on the hearts of chosen souls. Enoch, the ancient scribe of heaven, was one of them. He could walk between worlds and hear things that other people couldn't. People said that his writing sounded like the language of light sentences, not made by human thought, but breathed through him by divine beings. These were the books that talked to angels, and through them, people could see the things that were impossible to see, the hidden patterns of creation, the music that moves stars, and the voice that called everything into being in the old world. It was not arrogant to think that mortals could carry heavenly words. It was giving up. The ancients didn't think of themselves as writers. They thought of themselves as vessels. They wrote slowly and with respect, knowing that every letter carried breath that wasn't theirs. For instance, Enoch was not described as a prophet who yelled orders. Instead, he was described as someone who listened. He listened so hard that even silence started to speak. His pen moved as if it were being guided by invisible hands, writing on stone and parchment things that no one else had ever seen. He wrote down the paths of the stars, the jobs of angels, and the names of beings whose voices shaped the universe. But he never said they were his. He said he was just a witness. That humility has a quiet beauty to it, the idea that divine truth doesn't belong to us, but flows through us. The Ethiopian monks who later copied Enoch's words really understood this. They sat in the dark with candles, carefully tracing his writing, thinking they were touching something holy. They saw the ink as a prayer and the parchment as a kind of altar. Copying was not work. It was a form of worship. They didn't want a reward. They just wanted to keep what heaven had once whispered to a man who was brave enough to listen. It was thought that the rhythm of each syllable was like the pulse of creation. Reading those words out loud brought you closer to the sound of God's heart beating. People in ancient times didn't think of writing as just a way to talk to each other. It was a call to action. Writing was a way to bring the unseen into the present. When Enoch wrote down his visions, or when prophets like Baruch and Isaiah heard voices from the whirlwind, they weren't writing down dreams. They were keeping echoes from places beyond the sky. These writings connected the body and the spirit, as well as life and death. People said that even angels listened when those words were read out loud because they remembered the first light. The books that talk to angels are a mystery, not only because of where they came from, but also because they have lasted so long. They lived through storms of fire and forgetting, crossed deserts and oceans, and were hidden in caves or buried in monasteries where monks watched over them for hundreds of years. Every time a new generation opened them, they felt the same shaking, a mix of fear and peace, and the wonder of holding something that might have touched heaven. These weren't books to be read. They were to be felt. One did not pick apart their meaning, but let it slowly reveal itself. Like dawn breaking over mountains, the story of Enoch's dictation spread far and wide. Scholars in far-off places were curious about how a man could talk to angels and still be human. Some people said that Enoch's soul left his body and went to the heavens when he listened. There, the archangels taught him how creation works. Some people thought that the words themselves held light, so much light that the human tongue could barely hold them. It was like the words were alive, because they had different meanings for different people. People who wanted wisdom found peace, but people who wanted power found only silence. People said that the text would only show itself to people who were humble when they read it. In Ethiopia, where the Book of Enoch was still kept safe while most of the world forgot about it, people still treat these kinds of texts like living things. People kiss the manuscripts before they open them and never read them without praying. The monks talk to each other quietly, as if the pages are listening. The gold ink glows like starlight caught in the flicker of oil lamps. It is not hard to picture the angels who wrote these words still being around, even though we can't see them, guarding the memory of what they said. It is a great gift to be able to carry heavenly words. It doesn't want intelligence. It wants a pure heart. The prophets and scribes who got them were not very powerful. They were often quiet, forgotten people like shepherds, wanderers, and dreamers, but they were the ones who spoke for the eternal. It reminds us that heaven doesn't pick the strong, but the weak, that the most important truths don't shout, but whisper. The real miracle is that an infinite God would speak through limited people and trust. They're shaking hands with the weight of eternity. People who read these books with open hearts often say they feel a strange calm, as if something old is waking up inside them. The words don't just teach, they also remind. They bring back memories that are too deep for the mind memories, of a place where peace had no opposite. The tales of angels coming down, light taking shape, and souls being judged not by what they do but by how pure they are, all sound less like myths and more like echoes of something that was once known. The rhythm of the holy text seems to remind the human spirit of where it came from. The monks say that when the angels told Enoch what to write, they weren't just giving him secrets to satisfy his curiosity. They were giving him a map to find his way back to harmony. They think that every passage has a layer of music underneath it that speaks to the soul. That is why you should read those kinds of texts slowly and breathe them in instead of saying them. They are not meant to be understood quickly, but rather taken in slowly, like how one listens to waves or wind. And maybe that's the mystery that will always be there with these divine dictations, that heaven still speaks, not always through new books or prophets, but through the same quiet impulse that first made Enoch want to listen. Even now, when someone sits quietly and opens their heart, it feels like something unseen is beginning to move, creating words not in sound but in understanding. God is still looking for someone to listen. And in that listening, in that humility, the old miracle happens again. a mortal carrying heavenly words, not to claim them, but to let them live again through the fragile gift of faith. There are books that used to sing in the voices of prophets, but now they are quiet. Their pages, as thin as moth wings, are buried under hundreds of years of dust, waiting for the world to remember how to listen. These are the forbidden texts, the holy books that were too bright, too risky, or maybe even too honest for their time. Some were locked away by kings and councils, while others just faded from memory, slipping quietly into the past. But the silence around them is not empty. It hums softly, like a harp string being touched by an invisible hand. It is a quiet that talks. We might be asking the wrong question when we want to know why they were hidden. Men didn't always choose to bury them. Heaven let them rest. God has its own sense of time, which is slower and deeper than human clocks. Maybe these books had truths that were too big for hearts that weren't ready. If they had spoken too soon, their words might have burned instead of lit up. They could have broken what they were meant to show, just like sunlight pouring through untempered glass. So, the holy knowledge waited, folded up in stillness, and slept under the watchful eye of time. Picture a monk from hundreds of years ago holding one of these forbidden scrolls in a dark monastery. The candle next to him flickers, and his shadow shakes on the stone wall. People have told him that reading these words is dangerous because they might make him think of things that no one can answer. But his heart aches to know. He opens the parchment and finds not blasphemy, but beauty that hurts the soul. The ink glows softly in the light, and he reads about angels who fell from grace, secret places, and what happens to the soul after death. It feels like there are people in the room who aren't there, and the air is heavy with their presence. He reads a few lines, then closes the book again, not because he's scared, but because he respects it. He knows that some things must be kept quiet. Things that are kept secret have a sacredness to them. Divine truths must also retreat when the world gets too loud. Just like night protects the stars and the seed hides its life in the dark earth. It wasn't just cruelty that kept the forbidden texts from being read. Mercy also kept them hidden. People weren't always ready to carry their weight. Some people talked about cosmic orders that people can't understand, while others talked about fallen beings who used to live with people or divine justice that goes beyond earthly law. These kinds of thoughts could shake up kingdoms, threaten power, or tear apart the shaky foundations of faith. Silence fell like a cloak to protect both the word and the world. But silence isn't the same as being absent. Something is still alive in the stillness. The words softly breathe in their sleep, as if they are dreaming of the day they will be heard again. The monks say that silence is a form of worship in Ethiopia, where some of these banned texts were kept. They say that silence is a language that heaven understands better than any sound. They think that when a text is hidden, its spirit keeps speaking, but not with words. Instead, it speaks through intuition, dreams, and the quiet longing in the hearts of those who are looking for it. Truth cannot perish. It merely conceals itself until we are sufficiently gentle to accept it. There are times in life when silence is holy, when we realize that not all answers need to be said. This is also taught in the books that are not allowed. They remind us that knowing things can hurt us if we aren't humble. Some of their writings talked about the balance between heaven and earth, and how creation shakes when people take too much. In Enoch's visions, the angels fell not because they were bad, but because they wanted to share something that was meant to be divine. And maybe that's why so many old books are gone. Not as punishment, but to keep them safe. Picture those manuscripts lying under stone altars, wrapped in linen and kissed by the years. The parchment fades, but the words inside seem to be frozen in time. Each line is like a heartbeat that has stopped, waiting for time to start again. The monks who watched over them knew they weren't hiding lies. They were keeping the fire going. With shaking hands, they copied the forbidden texts. Their breaths were steady, and their chants echoed softly through the stone halls. To them, keeping quiet wasn't a betrayal. It was a promise to God that the world would be ready one day, and maybe that day is coming closer. It feels less like finding these books again and more like remembering them. The books of Enoch, Jubilees, the Shepherd of Hermas, and others. They are not screaming into the modern world. Instead, they are whispering softly, as if they want to see if we can hear them without being afraid. When we read them, we feel a strange tenderness, as if something old and familiar has touched our soul. Their silence was never a punishment. It was a time to grow. They wanted people to listen with their hearts, not their minds. It's a quiet ache to know how much was lost and how much was kept hidden. There is beauty in that pain, though. Silence teaches you to be patient and to listen. It shows us that the divine doesn't always make noise. Sometimes it hums in the background, like a song you only hear in your dreams. The banned texts invite us to that quiet place. They don't want us to believe or be afraid. They just want us to sit next to their silence and feel its weight, to think that maybe the most sacred truths aren't written down, but are found in the pauses, the spaces between the words, and the breath before the prayer, when the councils long ago chose which scriptures would live in light and which would sink into shadow. Maybe even they felt sad about it. Heaven didn't forget the forbidden texts. Only people did. They became the quiet protectors of secrets, the faith's hidden roots that could still grow. Every now and then, a line from one of them comes back to life, a piece of Enoch, a verse from Baruch, a song from the Maccabean, and the silence stirs, as if it were breathing again. It reminds us that the divine can never be lost, only hidden. Perhaps the aim of sacred silence is not to punish or hide, but to protect. To let the truth grow in the dark until it can be accepted without fear, spoken without distortion, and loved without possession. The forbidden texts are still there, but they are out of reach of sound. They live in the still places of devotion, in the hearts of people who read the stars, and in the rhythm of chants that start before dawn. They are the prayers of time itself that go unspoken. They are waiting, with no end in sight, for the moment when people will once again open their hearts and listen to what silence has been trying to say. For hundreds of years, the silence stayed the same, with only parchment and prayer keeping watch. The ancient texts slept in the monasteries of Ethiopia, wrapped in cloth and incense smoke. Faith, not armies, kept them safe. The monks copied the same lines by hand over and over again, never in a hurry and never doubting that what they held was holy. And then, as if heaven had finally woken up from its long sleep, the world outside began to move. A new age of seekers began. These were men and women who no longer looked for power, but for knowledge. The rediscovery started slowly, like the first light of dawn. People from far-off lands, scholars with glasses and notebooks, came in the 19th and 20th centuries. They had heard rumors of a secret canon books older than memory, written in a language that almost no one could read. They came to Ethiopia looking for old things, but what they found was something alive. The monks greeted them with slow smiles and coffee brewed over coals. Then they led them through the winding halls of monasteries built on the sides of mountains. There was a lot of incense in the air, and the sound of prayer filled the stone halls. When the scholars finally got to see the manuscripts, they felt like time had stopped. The words of Enoch, Jubilees, Baruch, and the Maccabean were in front of them. These were books that the world had once thought were lost, but here they were, sleeping in candlelight, untouched by years of silence. It wasn't just a moment of discovery, it was a reunion. The scholars cried quietly, and the monks watched them with calm understanding because they had never thought the books were lost. These were living friends to them, breathing in the rhythm of devotion. They kept the flame of memory alive through the dark ages, never asking for recognition, only loyalty. Now, people from faraway places were kneeling in front of their treasures, and for the first time, the ancient and the modern, the thoughtful and the curious came together. The rediscovery of the Ethiopian Bible was more than an academic triumph. It was a spiritual awakening. For a long time, Western scholars thought that many of these books were just pieces or legend stories the early church fathers talked about but never saw. But in Ethiopian monasteries, they found whole books written in GS that were beautifully illuminated and kept in conditions that made them last through time. These manuscripts held not only old texts, but also old ways of thinking. For example, they had a worldview that saw heaven and earth as two parts of the same divine breath. The visitors were amazed by the realization. What had once been thought to be a myth had lived on, quietly, in the hearts of those who never stopped believing. The monks, on the other hand, were kind and careful with the scholars. They had seen a lot of people come and go, some out of curiosity and some out of greed. But these men and women seemed different. They didn't want to own the books. They just wanted to understand them. They asked if they could touch the delicate pages, and when they read aloud from the GS script, their voices shook. Through a translator, one old and nearly blind monk told a scholar, "You came to find words. We were just keeping them alive for you." His smile was calm, the kind that shows patience and forgiveness as people read and translated the manuscripts. The voices that had been silent for so long began to speak again. The Book of Enoch revealed its visions of heavenly realms and angelic hierarchies. Jubilees revealed a holy calendar that showed the order in which God made things. The Maccabean told stories of faith and strength, and the ascension of Isaiah took souls up through the seven heavens. These weren't just interesting things. They were links to a deeper past. Every word felt like a seed that had been buried in the ground of time, and was now touched by light. The news of these finds spread all over the world. Universities, libraries, and museums started to recognize what Ethiopia had kept, not a footnote in history, but a parallel canon that showed what early Christianity was like before it split into councils and creeds. Even the smartest people were humbled by the realization. The scholars who had come to teach the world found themselves becoming students again, listening to the soft wisdom of men who had spent their whole lives in silence. A scholar sat under an old sycamore tree in the small Debre Damo monastery, which is one of the oldest in Ethiopia. He talked to a monk who had never left the mountain. The monk's beard was as white as wool, and his hands were rough from working with parchment. "Why did you keep them?" the scholar asked in a low voice. The monk looked out at the horizon, where the light faded into purple dusk. "Because they are alive," he said. "You can't bury something that is still alive." He then said, "We were waiting for the right time. There was a lot of noise in the world. It is listening again now." That moment showed what the rediscovery really meant. It wasn't about having things, archives, or credit. It was about paying attention to the prophets who had been forgotten, the rhythms of an older faith, and the silence that had kept these words safe. The scholars started to understand that the monks weren't just taking care of books, they were also taking care of time itself. Every manuscript was a door, and every reader who opened it traveled through time. Some of the texts that were found again were taken to be studied and digitized, so that their voices would not be lost again. Others stayed in the monasteries, untouched, and were still protected by the men who had promised to take care of them. It was hard to find a balance between preservation and respect, but both sides seemed to know what to do. We should share what we know, but we should never take away its soul. The monks blessed each book before it left their care by praying over it. In return, the scholars promised to come back, and many did, but this time not for research, but for peace. People who go to the highlands of Ethiopia still say they feel like they are stepping outside of time. In the libraries of Lalibela and Oxum, old manuscripts still sit on wooden shelves. Their covers are made of leather, and the pages smell like age and faith. The rediscovery goes on, not just in physical form, but also in the hearts of those who read the texts with awe. The monks and scholars working together is a meeting of two faiths, one of devotion and the other of questioning. And gratitude flows between them, something bigger than both of them. Gratitude is what connects the past and the present. Thankful that the people who watched over the books never gave up. Thankful that those who looked never stopped listening. What was once forbidden is now familiar, and what was once hidden now shines softly, not with the harsh light of revelation, but with the warmth of memory. The rediscovery of the Ethiopian manuscripts is not the end. It is the beginning of a new awakening, like the truth slowly waking up after a long, dreamlike sleep. And while the monks chant their hymns in the mountains, and the scholars write what they find in far-off cities, the old words whisper again in the quiet space between their worlds, alive, eternal, and finally heard. There is a feeling that something eternal still flickers beneath the passing centuries, even in Ethiopia's deep valleys, where ancient monasteries cling to the cliffs like prayers carved into stone. Faith here has never been a bright, blinding flame. Instead, it has always been a quiet light that lasts through storms, invasions, and being forgotten. It shines in the eyes of the monks who still get up before dawn to chant verses that were written thousands of years ago. And it shines in the hearts of the people who have kept their faith alive through the years. People say that when you walk through the quiet halls of Lalibela at night, you can almost feel this steady stream of devotion humming in the cool air. It's the same faith that protected the Ark and the same respect that kept the lost books safe when no one else remembered them. There were times when God's words seemed to be lost, when scriptures were lost in the dust of history and empires rose on top of ruins. But in Ethiopia, the truth had a strange way of hiding instead of dying. It waited for its chance to breathe again, like a candle protected by cupped hands. Every secret monastery and every old scroll wrapped in cloth became a place for that light. The monks knew something that most people forget. The sacred doesn't go away. It just goes quiet until hearts are ready to hear it again. They took care of that silence like a garden, cutting away fear and doubt so that faith could grow deeper without anyone seeing it. When travelers came, pilgrims, dreamers, they often talked about the glow they felt, not with their eyes but somewhere deep inside them. They discovered that even the stones appeared to be alive with prayer. It wasn't a loud or commanding faith. It was something humble and big, as if God had chosen to live not in the noise of revelation, but in the quiet of waiting. The monks who lived in those mountains knew that the world's light could flicker, and that even the holiest fires could go out when people forgot about them. But the eternal flame, the one that the Creator breathed into life, could never really go out. There were always people who kept that flame alive, even when no one spoke for hundreds of years. Men who were old and knew the Psalms by heart. Women who whispered old blessings to their kids at night. Priests who copied words that were fading by the dim light of oil lamps. Even when invaders came and burned down temples, some people remembered parts of the Bible. These verses lived on, not in ink, but in the rhythm of their breath and song. These were the guardians of the light who couldn't be seen. They held on to truths that were too sacred to be written down on fragile parchment. And maybe that's the miracle. Light doesn't need anyone's permission to shine. It doesn't want temples or recognition. It lives where it is welcome. When the old books of Enoch and Jubilees were lost to the west, the light they carried did not fade. Instead, it found a home in the highlands of Ethiopia, where monks cared for them as if they were living beings instead of relics. For them, reading was more than just learning. It was also listening. To turn a page was to let the divine breath in again, and so the flame moved from one soul to the next, gently and slowly. This light is beautiful because it didn't need a show to live on. People often look for the truth in thunder and miracles, but here it stayed in whispers and candlelight. The monks say that sometimes the Creator hides the brightest stars behind the thickest clouds. This isn't to hide them, but to teach the eyes how to look. The same was true for these holy books and the faith that kept them safe. They were never gone, just hidden. And when the time was right, when the seekers' hearts were quiet enough to hear, the veil came down and the light came back. Finding these texts again in modern times didn't start their light. It just took our eyes a while to catch up to what had always been there. The manuscripts were asleep, but the spirit inside them was always awake. It waited, as patient as dawn, for people to wake up to it again. The monks who watched over them never doubted this. To them, time was like a circle of fire. Seasons came and went, kings rose and fell, but the flame in the middle stayed the same. And now that the world has found the wisdom it once thought it had lost, that same circle shines again, just as it always has. Think of a candle that has been passed down through generations. Its wax is long gone, but new wicks keep borrowing its flame. That is how the truth of God lives, not in the fragile vessel or the material, but in the fire itself. It goes across languages, cultures, and centuries without ever having to call itself holy. It just is. And those who find it, whether in scripture or silence, become part of its light. That is what the monks knew as they prayed in the quiet of Oxome, and what the prophets understood as they spoke under the stars. Light does not belong to a time, but to all time. The flame still burns in quiet monasteries, where the sound of the world is replaced by the hum of insects. The chants rise and fall like breathing, bouncing off the stone walls that have been blackened by time. Every note is a flash, and every prayer is a reminder that something more than memory lasts. The world outside may rush and forget, but inside those walls, time stands still. The same holy light that once lit the garden, the ark, and the scrolls of Enoch still shines brightly. The faithful all know that the divine never really goes away. It may look like it's hidden in the shadows, but it's always close by, waiting to be seen again. Truth stays with us even when we forget it, just like stars disappear with the dawn but stay beyond the light. For thousands of years, the Ethiopians have believed that the light of heaven cannot be destroyed, only hidden. And so they keep taking care of it through their prayers, their scriptures, and their simple, strong faith. The flame doesn't go out because it is protected by walls. It lives in hearts that won't let it die. The night has come again to the Ethiopian highlands. The mountains look like sleeping giants, with their dark shapes covered by a sky full of old stars. The air is cool and smells like earth and myrrh. In the distance, a monastery bell tolls, making a single, long note that echoes through the valleys like a heartbeat. The world seems to let out a breath. The land has been carrying the weight of memory all day of kings and angels, lost books and whispered prayers. Now, in the quiet of night, that memory settles into silence. Everything here moves at the pace of eternity. Under the shadow of holy mountains, the tall grasses sway in the wind, and the stones that have been there since the first temples were built form invisible paths between them. It carries with it bits of voices, like monks chanting from their candlelit cells, or verses whispered in Ge'ez, the language of angels and saints. Their words rise like smoke and drift towards the stars, where they disappear into the vast silence of heaven. At this moment, there is no difference between the sky and the earth, or between the breath of a mortal and the whisper of a god. The mountains seem to hum a low, never-ending hymn. The sound is so deep that you can only feel it. You can almost hear the prayers of people who lived long ago if you listen closely. These prayers were made by prophets who traveled these lands, scribes who wrote their devotion on parchment that was fading, and guardians who promised to protect what was sacred at any cost. Their voices mix with the wind, making something that will last forever. People say that the mountains remember everything, from the footsteps of the good to the tears of exiles to the laughter of children born in holy light. And now, as the stars twinkle above them, they remember you to another person who stopped to listen to the same silence and breathe the same holy air. The night gets deeper, but it doesn't get darker. The moon spills silver on the stone churches that have been carved into the rock, making their rough surfaces look like glass. In Lalibela, where the ground is shaped into places of worship, the shadows seem to come to life. They aren't scary, but they are soft, as if they are protecting the dreams of the people who sleep there. A monk in white robes sits at the gate of one of these churches, his head bowed in prayer. The flame in his lantern flickers, making short halos on the old walls. Even though he doesn't look up, he seems to know you're there, watching, listening, and breathing in the holy silence. The clock here moves differently. The stars don't hurry, and the hours don't pass by. They stay there, as patient as the faith that built these stones. There are stories in the air that were never written down, only felt. Stories of divine meetings, of angels who walked in the cool mist before dawn, and of seekers who came here with questions and left with peace. Something of those old truths stays in every gust of wind and every rustle of leaves. Maybe it's not the words that matter anymore, but the silence that holds them. It's a silence so deep that it feels like the world is holding you. A river flows through the plains, making a soft sound as it goes. The insects, the wind, and the occasional distant howl of a hyena all make up the night. It is a lullaby that has no beginning or end and has been around for a long time. Ethiopians have always said that God walks in the cool hours of the night, when the world is sleeping and only the faithful are awake. As the stars pulse gently in the black sky, one can almost picture that presence moving softly among the peaks, even though it can't be seen. The monks think that the hour before dawn is the best time for the soul to be close to heaven. At this time, darkness feels both infinite and kind. They call it the shadow of grace, which is when God rests next to creation and breathes with it. You might feel that way right now. The unspoken comfort, the stillness that isn't empty but full, like the space between heartbeats. The mountains hold that stillness. They have been doing this since the beginning, when the first light touched their heads and called them holy. As you take a breath right now, you might feel something move inside you. It's not a thought or a memory. It's a quiet recognition. You have heard this story before, not in words, but in the way your life goes up and down. Hope rises and falls. The light flickers but never goes out, and you are always looking for and resting. Everyone, no matter what their religion or heart, will eventually come to this same quiet place, where the spirit no longer needs to know anything, just be. This secret has always been known by the mountains. That's why they never rush. They seem happy just to be under the stars. The constellations above them turn slowly, like they have for thousands of years. The same patterns that used to help sailors and shepherds find their way now guide your eyes. They are also part of the story, reminding you that heaven and earth have always been the same. Each star is like a word written by a hand that can't be seen. Each one tells us that creation is still going on and still happening. The stone, the sky, and the heart are all one quiet prayer when they shine. The bell rings again, but this time it's softer, like it's fading into a dream. The monk's lantern flickers once and then stays still. The air gets cooler and smells like rain that will come before morning. Somewhere, a page turns. An unseen hand opens an old book, maybe one of those ancient scrolls that have been kept safe for hundreds of years. But no one reads the words out loud. The silence is all that needs to be said now. Let your heart rest. You have walked through the gardens of prophecy, the fires of loss, the echoes of angels, and the strength of faith. The story doesn't end here. It just goes to sleep, waiting for another night and another person to hear it. It stays, like the light that never went out, soft, eternal, and alive in the quiet. You can see heaven and earth meet here, under these mountains. The stars are watching, and the wind is carrying the prayers of those who came before you. Let go of everything that wants to know what it means, like thoughts and time. There is peace here, and it doesn't need a reason. Some stories go on forever. They only have dreams,